Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 350, part 1. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, Dr. Norge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim. So, even we think our anniversary recording is getting a little long, so that's the Sensei of the Whatnot Cellulin and the Duke of You-Know.
How's it going, eh?
We knew.
Strap in, folks.
Yeah. This is very interesting. We had some very cool opportunities when it came to this episode. First of all, this is a two-parter. We start taking a look at Batman Year One. And we're not going to do this with all of our look at Frank Miller. We won't be dividing up the pieces parts. We had also, that we're attaching onto this, an opportunity to talk with author Tom King about his work on Time Warp and also on his book, A Once Crowded Sky. And with, his links to being a DC fan and with the Vertigo story in Time Warp, it was a great opportunity to talk to a writer about the creative process, which just felt right for an anniversary show. So this turned into a two-parter where we have the first half of our Year One discussion, and we're looking at this really in depth. We're taking a look at not only the Year One story as it was originally published in single issues, we're also taking a look and comparing it to the film. And it's really just kind of a great opportunity to go into depth on what we liked better between which releases, and we actually go scene by scene with that. There's a lot of opportunities for us to kind of look at, but this part worked a little better when they were animated, but oh my god, how could they even think of trying to bring this one to the screen? And so I really hope you enjoy this episode. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network and the League of Comic Book Podcasts. Sponsoring us this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Jim, over at DCBService.com, this is our favorite time of the month. This is when we get a chance to start seeing what the new books are going to be for May. I don't know about you. I geek out when I get to go to their website and see all the deals each month. And it's not just on single monthly titles. They do bundles of groupings of books. They do trade paperbacks. They do hardcovers, statues. Also, alternate editions of covers. The variant covers are available for pre-order as well. So it's great if you're a collector and you're like, these are all things I like to just kind of browse around and try to make a pull list for the month. Remember that they are a Comixology and Iverse Media digital partner. 5% of all of those purchases goes towards your DCB service order, and it doesn't cost you anything more. So please consider linking those accounts to your DCB service accounts, and it's a great way to support our show sponsor. And I just want to thank them. We're on episode 350 now, and they have been consistently with us and support a number of other podcasts. Please go to our show website, and please click on those links and pop on over to their site. InStockTrades.com is also your source for collected editions. And it's funny, Jim and I were just talking about things like No Man's Land and stories like that because we were talking about the character of Sarah Essen. And if you don't already have Year One or any of Frank Miller's work that you're missing, we're going to be talking about The Dark Knight Returns. We're going to be talking about The Dark Knight Strikes Again. And we're going to be talking, of course, part 2 of this, more about Year One. You can go over to InStockTrades.com, pick up any of those books, but also if you haven't followed the further adventures of Sarah Essen, No Man's Land's a pretty pivotal story in her career, so you're going to want to be picking up things like No Man's Land. But they are your collected edition source. Remember that orders of $50 or more give you free shipping. And I want to thank that site for continuing to support our show as well. James, what kind of a podcast are we?
Raging Bullets is a spoiler podcast. We go in-depth into plot lines, story twists, and whatnot of the comics we're discussing on the show. So, if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
Let's talk Batman.
Spinning with great speed, the Flash creates a protective vacuum around himself.
Jim, for our first discussion as we begin our three-part look at Frank Miller's Batman work, I want to talk about Batman Year One. And this was a 4-issue miniseries written by Frank Miller with art by David Mazzucchelli, and I apologize for any name butchery. We were looking through the single issues. I couldn't find any of the other creative team on this one. You've got the trade, so you have the colorist?
Yeah, Richard Lewis is colorist with letterer Todd Klein, and of course Batman was created by Bob Kane.
Now, this was an interesting... What was your history with this? I bought these original issues as they came out. So that was where this all started for me. Where did it start for you?
I bought the trade because you told me about 7 years ago, oh man, you really want to read this. It's really a good story. So that's my introduction to year one, because when we first started doing the show, actually it may have even been before we started doing the show, when I first started just looking at different comics and all that, I remember you recommending this to me, so I picked it up then.
Now, we're going to be talking kind of casually. They did an animated release of this, which I think is just an incredibly faithful adaptation of the original book. There's slight variations as far as differences, and I think it was more done to get the animated feature in the compressed time, I guess. But there's very little cut out from the animation. I do think that there's certain things from here where it's a little more extended than it was in the animation, that I would have loved to have seen that in the animation. But, I mean, we're talking about, like, what would have amounted to, I guess, a few seconds here and there. But overall, I found both to be very satisfying and also both to be very contemporary and timeless. Like, this does not feel, reading the single issues and watching the animation does not feel dated to me on any level. Timeless is probably the best word that I would put there. What was your experience? Do you feel the same way, or was it different for you? It's okay if it was.
Well, your comments about timeless, I 100% agree with. I thought both of them didn't seem too dated to me. For me, I enjoyed the animated film. I thought it was a really good one, but you know how we always say, oh, this is not my new favorite. This is not my new favorite. I didn't have that this is not my new favorite reaction when I saw the animated. Now, as I said, it's a good movie, and it's a solid adaptation of year one. So I'm like, okay, that was really cool. But just for some reason, and I really think it was the internal dialogue. Yeah, with year one, that is a crucial part of what is going on, because it's especially a lot of what everyone sees and what they say and what they think, etc. That whole blend. Now, the movie itself did have internal dialogue, but those are the sections they really shortened down. And I think by shortening it, by compressing that, is where for me it kind of lost it a little bit compared to the book.
See, and I see now. I think we're thinking this the same way. I really enjoyed the animated feature. I guess I was probably giving it a little extra credit, figuring that they were compressing it for time. But I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Like, I really enjoyed it. I'm incredibly satisfied that I bought it. It wasn't one of those that, like, knocked down one of the other ones, but I thought it was very satisfying and well put together. But it's funny. I agree with you. That was where my kind of, like, I wish this couple seconds was in, or that couple seconds. Of course, over the course of an animated feature, that adds up really quick. Mm-hmm. To what I would have wanted, but I do think you're right. I think there was some dialogue pieces that were missing. That would be the only criticism that I really have, because otherwise, I thought that the animated feature was an incredibly faithful adaptation of this story. Like, let's jump right into the story, and maybe along the way we can kind of organically, if we feel that there was something where there's differences. I liked in both this opening, because you're seeing two different viewpoints of Gotham. You're seeing Jim Gordon, who's on the train level, coming in there, and he's seeing Gotham for what it is, and just how glad he is that his wife is not coming this way. But also, faced with the fact that his wife is pregnant, saying to himself, I hope that she's not, and feeling guilty about that, because it's a moment that he should be happy about. He should be excited about as a dad. When you have a child that's a beginning, a new future, something, it's a major transition point. And I do think it's normal for any parent, male or female, to be like nervous or worried about that because of the life changes. But to add on top of it that you're moving to Gotham, I really get it. But then you've got contrasting that, Bruce flying in on the plane, where he's coming back with the viewpoint of, from up here, it's almost like he's looking at Gotham in a way that he thinks it should look like, or what he ultimately wants it to look like, but fully knowing that that's the illusion. The reality is what's going on and the train ride. And I really liked the contrast of the two. This relationship and this kind of contrasting of the two, and what they both feel about Gotham and their own hopes and dreams, in some ways really illustrates for me, and that's what I loved about this piece, how you could see these two eventually becoming allies and friends. And that relationship to me is, I think, a very pivotal part of the way that this works. because why this story really develops why Jim Gordon would develop a friendship with a vigilante, being that he is a good police officer. That at his core, he is that guy who's trying to do the right thing. And it's funny how he feels like the doing the right thing is a mistake, and that's what led him to Gotham and all that. It's like, if I just kept my mouth shut and that type of thing. But he can't do that because he's a good guy at his core. I really like that whole theme in all this. This opening is brilliant.
Oh, definitely, yeah. It's one of those, again, this was one of those moments where that inner dialogue and just like you get right into their head right on page one, you start getting this understanding of them. Now, we already had a comfort level with who these people were supposed to be, but for somebody who's fresh off the boat, for someone who's brand new into this stuff, they could literally jump into this and go right from the beat, and you can already start getting the feel of who Bruce is, who Gordon is. And the thing that I really enjoyed about year one, yes, this is the first year of Batman, but Gordon is as crucial a character, if not more crucial, in the story than Bruce and Batman are. Because you've got to understand, Jim Gordon, where he's coming from, why he, as this honest cop is willing to embrace this vigilante, and not only embrace, but eventually they become good friends and allies. You need to have that whole connection and that whole synergy between the two of them, and I am so glad that is where we got from this. And to be honest, the last time I read this was years ago when you first recommended it to me, so I kind of didn't completely remember how much of a crucial, pivotal character Jim Gordon was in the Batman story. And I love the fact that we get that, because we always say some of the best Batman stories are with him and Jim Gordon, because you get to see that interaction with people other than Superman or Wonder Woman or some of the other superheroes. You get to see his one-on-one daily interactions with a real person. And for me, that is something you kind of need to have that connection with Batman for.
This creative team did a critically acclaimed and just awesome job on Daredevil. And I was reading Daredevil, and when I heard that, they were going to be doing Batman, it's like, you take a character like Daredevil who, they made him feel so important to me. And then now we're going to put these guys on a character that already feels important to me. Wow. I was just blown away by what they did here. It just felt right at the time. It was very cutting edge. It was doing something with Batman that just needed to be done. This was right. This was after Crisis. And the issue after this four-issue mini event that happened in the main Batman book was the first post-Crisis, I should say, issue with Jason Todd. It was the one where they reimagined Jason Todd's origin. And then moving forward, he was in that new origin. So this happened at a time where it was setting Batman in a new direction, and that carried over then to the Robin of the time, and it was really neat to be a Batman reader at this point. I just remember the excitement around it, I couldn't wait till the issue following this mini, and I call it a mini because it feels like a mini series now, but it wasn't. These were single issues. You waited for 4 months for this to be completed. And that was just really great, at the time. Just the cliffhangers at the end of this were perfect. I vividly remember what it was like to read this. What I didn't remember, it was funny going back to this, and I don't know why, because I read it back, I want to say I read this before Batman Begins came out. I didn't realize the character of Flass was in Batman until I was reading it this time. I'm like, oh my God, they pulled Flass right from this for Batman Begins. So that was Gordon's partner in the Batman Begins movie. And they took that dialogue from this and put that right in Batman Begins, which really fits why I love Batman Begins so much, because it pulled so much from great Batman storytelling. But there are sequences in this where you can say, oh my gosh, the movie pulled it right from this, especially when they're driving in the car and having that talk about, the need to just kind of go along with things and be one of the boys. All that stuff comes right thematically from this story. And I think that's really great.
Yeah, Flash was a wonderful character, especially the very beginning, the introduction of the guy. You get that feel that he's scum right from the very start of the series, and then as it goes on, for me, I know, he was a character I kind of forgot about. When I first started rereading this, and as I'm reading, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, now I remember, yeah. And it took me a couple read-throughs for me to even remember Batman Begins connection, but I was laughing because you get that anticipation. You know Gordon's going to do a beat down on this guy, or somebody's going to give this guy a beating just because he was that, hey, Jimmy, that whole over-the-top, you wanted to see him get pummeled. And I was so happy when we do eventually get to see that and how it played out. But just this opening intro of this guy, in the train station, him being a little bit of a jerk. I'm saying, hey, Gotham's a great place for cops. And it's that whole, we can, we look the other way, we take, and it's without outright saying we do crooked stuff here, but he's implying it right from the beginning just to let Gordon know where he stands. Just got to get a feel of the guy. You don't want to openly say, hey, we take bribes and we look the other way for drug dealers, but you got to get the Gordon's feel. See what kind of person he is. Same thing with that first meeting with the commissioner. You get that same slimy feeling from that. And I was just like, I really loved that.
I liked that in Batman Begins they didn't feel that they had to make the commissioner himself evil. They changed Loeb because it was the same commissioner, but it was a different tone to the character. But in one of the sequences one of the things I really loved about the Year One animated feature, first of all, the voice acting. I thought that the guy that they chose for Flass was brilliant because he sounded like that guy. Like the tone, the way he carried himself, all of that was delivered brilliantly. I also thought the casting for Jim Gordon and Bruce Wayne really worked out at first, because I was taken aback at first of Batman's voice, but then as it went on, I really began to enjoy the acting of Batman in it. But Jim Gordon, I thought, was spot on right from the get-go. One of the sequences I really love in the film is coming right after this, when Batman first connects with Alfred again. I liked in the film the drive-up, how you had Alfred waiting there at the end, and you got to hear the music, the build, to him coming home. There was something about seeing the limo pull up that way that I really liked. It seems like kind of a strange thing, Sean, it's just a car pulling up. But it's Wayne Manor. And there was an anticipation built in the animated feature that I thought I was geeking out. I thought it was fantastic. Because art style-wise, they were pulling right from this, but we got to see that in motion and build to actually seeing what it's like for him to go into this place that was drawn so brilliantly in this. So there was something about that I really enjoyed.
Oh, I got to hold on. I'm completely agreeing with you on just the build-up and anticipation and just everything, how that played out. Both in the book and the movie. As you're sitting there saying, Sean, it's just a drive-up. Like, no, you are completely right on that observation. I'm going to 100% co-sign on that just because there was a very powerful, feel to that. And you need to have those kind of moments. And I especially love the fact that when Bruce arrives, when Bruce comes in there, you get that great moment with Alfred. But then the very first thing that Bruce does is he visits his parents' grave. This is such an important part of his being. The reason he's doing everything he's doing is because of their death. And I loved seeing just that moment, on screen. I love seeing it in the comic. In the comic, it had that beautiful silent panel as he's just sitting there, and kind of just, telling his folks, hey, I'm home. I'm going to start doing this now. I'm going to honor you. I'm going to remember my vow. I'm going to, and you can, all these things that they don't have listed, showing in the book is running through my head as I'm watching, as I'm reading this. That it was like, this is cool. This is a really nice usage of an art moment.
Mm-hmm. Going on internal dialogue again, where it worked in both. When we see Flash get out of the vehicle for that shakedown that he was doing, Gordon's internal dialogue, I thought, in both sequences, I liked it. I think in the comic it was a little more expanded because I don't remember in the film. I keep telling myself it's either this or pumping gas. Then I tell myself I'm doing it for Barbara. Because it builds more to this idea that there's this intrinsic moral thing that he does. That's kind of unexplainable. Like, why is Jim Gordon Jim Gordon? Why does he do what he does? It's almost like the primal thing that Batman's going through. He has this primal drive. Gordon has something similar. I think they can't put their finger on it, but they connect over that. And there was something about that I thought was delivered well here. But in both the animated feature and here, the analysis of the combat of Flash that Gordon was doing, I ate up. Him sitting there looking at the type of training that he has, keeping it for future reference. And you can, you're sitting there saying with him, I want to do something right now. But, it's, and to me this added more, wow, this sense of Gordon went through something really bad where he was at. And by taking a stand against something like this in the past, he's put himself in a position now where he's gun-shy. And I really like that because it's a sense of, I like that Gordon to me feels human. You know, I always look up to Jim Gordon, and nothing in this takes away from that. If anything, I more admire him because of his human flaws in this. We get to see the guy, the strength, the sense of honor, but then we also get to see a man who has flaws like anybody else does, but he chooses when, you know, things hit a certain point to be Jim Gordon, to be that guy we all know and respect, and to step up. And there's something about reading through it this way and seeing it build to that I thought was absolutely fantastic.
Oh God, yeah. I'm in complete agreement with you on this. A great Gordon scene. You know, it really shows his strategery as he's just sitting there watching, planning, filing it away, you know, in the memory banks. Just, okay, I got to know what this guy can do. Because he's even anticipating the beatdown. And this is his first meeting with this guy. He knows, okay, when I have to expose this guy, he's going to be the one I'm going to have to throw down with. This is it right here. And he's getting ready for it. And that was a cool moment. And I was glad we got to see, we got some of that dialogue in the movie, because if we wouldn't have had that, it would have ruined everything you're saying, because Gordon is this stand-up guy. He's got to be this person that we want to respect. We want to have, you know, watching our back. He's the cop. He's the honest cop. He's doing it not just for the glory. He's not doing it for the kickbacks. He's doing it to protect and serve. And for him to not, you know, for him to look the other way, for him not to do, you know, act on this guy, there's got to be a reasoning behind it. And we're seeing that reasoning right here. This can't be his opening salvo. He can't walk up there, smack around flash in front of those kids. He's got to get all his ducks in a row. He's got to make sure everything is ready for when he drops down another cop.
I like that when DC does these trade releases, kind of similar to what they did with Killing Joke, they make choices to improve things sometimes. Now, in my hardcover, I don't know if this is true in your trade, the February 11th page was missing. Is that true in your trade?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to know what it says on the February 11th page?
Oh, yes.
It's a picture of the dictionary. And when you open it to strategery, the dictionary says, "Jim, this will never be a word." And so if that's not in yours, I'd be glad to buy you the original issues.
Strategery is very much a word. I enjoy it. Great.
And the artwork's amazing on that page.
Let me guess, it's somebody telling me I'm number one, right?
Yeah, you got that right. In a very Batman-like fashion. I love the training sequences in this, because the training builds to sequences we see later where we see how this man is able to narrowly survive situations. This is a guy who, through martial arts, is able to, first of all, not only recognize other people's fighting styles, but he's able to use his hands and cut through brick and knock down trees. I mean, you know, that's pretty tough. And you can see how this guy can take down metahumans. You know, this is a guy that you believe that can eventually do that. I love that we see, even here, with all of these impressive skills, him still saying, "I'm not ready yet. There's things missing." And this, I think, is a consistent theme with Batman, even to this day. This need to constantly up your game, to keep stepping it up, to keep training yourself, to keep looking for that new thing to give you a little bit more of an edge than you had before. And that, to me, is Batman. That drive, that intensity. I think there's a life skill to learn from that, though. And I think there is a message to Batman and that type of thing, that you should never be complacent in life. You know, and I think that's something, if there's anything that I've admired about the character, it's this idea that you can always be something more than what you are now. And I think that's what I really dig about the character more than anything else. That he never feels like the same. He feels like he's constantly evolving and pushing himself. And I like that. It's something I really like about the character. I think it's why in the New 52, like when he got armor, I was like, yeah, it makes sense.
See, here's something that got me with that, with that day. Mm-hmm. And because I'm sitting there and, you and I probably had a different reaction on this one. Because I'm sitting there watching, okay, he breaks brick, then he kicks down the tree, and I'm like, man, what that tree do to you, man? It's just a tree. Come on. Mm-hmm. All I'm saying is give trees a chance. Okay.
The dictionary called?
No, hold on. Serious point. Mm-hmm. Serious point. This is one of those panels that, does I don't know. It's dang near impossible to kick down a tree. You know, it's bricks are one thing, boards are another thing, but a tree, that is something beyond just martial arts skills. Because it's an actual living organism. It's an actually living, and trees are designed to bow and flex in the winds. You got a hurricane force winds not knocking over trees, but Bruce, Wayne can kick it down. That is something that I'm not saying it angers me or is wrong, or I'm not knocking it, because it is supposed to show Bruce Wayne has this, phenomenal training and martial arts skills, but that's humanly impossible for a person to actually do. And it's just something that I was like, the brick sequence is cool. And had they done boards or anything like that, that would be a completely different thing. Kicking down a tree is something that just, I'm like, part of me always just holds on to that, saying, that's physically impossible.
Except for Batman. This is a guy who went all the way around. No, see, and I like that. See, this is where we're adamantly going to have to disagree.
Yeah.
With Batman, I like that suspension of disbelief that this guy was so trained in martial arts that he learned so many exotic things that he may be able to do something like that. And to tell you how weird, and I'm not saying you're wrong for feeling the way you are, because you're not. That's your own feeling, and I can see how you arrive at that conclusion. But for me, I guess I've gone as far as looking at the tree and going, there's no foliage on that tree. Now, there's no foliage on that tree. It goes from the fact that it's wintertime, too. But I'm looking at that as, okay, maybe it's a dead tree. But even so, it's Batman. He's kicking down dead trees because he can, because he's Batman. He's like got Paul Bunyan-like feet. I don't know what it is, but that's, for some reason that doesn't, and I get what you're saying. Should it be possible? No. I agree with you. But yet, I somehow am okay with it being possible for Batman. And I guess that's what. So I agree with you. I don't think you're wrong, but for some reason, I like that it's possible for Batman.
And I'm not knocking this part of the story. It's something that always rings in my head whenever I see this type of stuff. And because it is Batman, I'm not going to even say, "Oh, this is terrible," because it is Bruce. Because of all the training we know he's gone through, and the writer wanted to use this moment to show that he is something beyond what a normal. He's gone through more than just your, down the street, karate training. This guy has gone through intense regiment, and this is a great way to show it. Him kicking down a tree, especially later on, we see him kicking through brick wall to escape from the firebomb. So there's a lot of usage of this plays out later on. So I'm not angry about it. It's just something that always just rings in my head how it's not possible. But again, everything you said but it's Batman. I'm like, oh, okay. You do have to have a suspension of disbelief when you read Batman, because there are certain laws of physics that he breaks just in being what he does. And comic books do that. You can't have it 100% true and realistic, especially with a lot of the cool gadgets that he's got. And so as I'm saying this, I'm like, but it's Batman. It's a comic book, Jim. Move on.
I think with Batman, you've got to skirt a line. And, if I see Batman picking up and throwing a Buick, I'm going to have more issue with that than I am him kicking down trees. For some reason, I'm okay. Kick down trees. And the whole point of this scene was to set up the fact that this guy can cut down the beam that he did when he was being captured, when the police were trying to overtake him.
Right. And
that was the whole point of this sequence, is to build in our minds a skill set where this guy can cut big, huge things down with his feet.
Yeah.
That or make us think he had years of being a lumberjack.
I'm a lumberjack. I'm okay.
My head actually went there, too. I love Monty Python. The corruption of Gotham and how it was developed here, I think, was something that was really important. Because, previously I had always read Batman stories where, the police were always on Batman's side. And it was, I grew up with the 60s show where, Batman was everybody's friend and, he was more smiley and open and hanging out with the police and stuff like that. Especially in, the 70s when I was first reading. I just remember, having this really good open relationship with the police where, he'd swing in and team up with, especially in Brave and the Bold, he'd swing in and team up with, this character, and the police were like, hey, Batman, those type of things, which, this really changed the tone of Batman's relationship with the police and headed him more into that darkness that we're used to seeing today, where we're used to seeing Batman being, he'll speak to Gordon. He'll speak to certain people, but he doesn't necessarily speak to everybody. He's more of an enigma to them. And I like that. I like that change. Not that I didn't like him being everybody's pal and stuff like that. I thought that was cool too. But for some reason, this added a mystery to Batman that seems to fit the whole theme. And it was at a time in my life, this is in high school when this came out, at a time in life where I'm like, wow, I've always thought this guy is cool. He's even cooler now. So there was something about that I really enjoyed with the corruption and this sense of how is this one man going to overcome all this?
Oh, God, yeah. And again, it's building. He's been there a couple months now, and Gordon's getting the groove of it, and he's not, taking, bribes. He's not, bending. He's not giving into what they want to do. And I loved seeing the fact that they're like, hey, Gordon's not playing ball with us. He's not one of us. We got to do something about this. And they're not ready to put a bullet in his head and dump the body. You're like, hey, give him a little message. But wait until I'm out of town. Because, Loeb doesn't want any connection to it. He needs to be apart from it. It's still not a, dump the body in the river point. It's going to get there eventually. But right now, let's give him just this little chance. He's like, I love that. He's like, oh, I had such high hopes for the kid. Let's give him a chance. And I thought that was, again, a cool usage of the corruption. They are in such power here that they're not worried about this one honest cop. They're not worried about him completely bringing down the system because they know what's Gordon going to do. He's not going to go to, who's he going to go to, who's he going to tell? And that was something that, Batman's Begin did a great job with, where Gordon's like, hey, who am I go to in a town like this? Well, we're seeing that here. There's still, even though we don't get that same dialogue, we're still seeing that same feeling, that same vibe to it. And that, again, really loved how they made the corruption, the darkness of the police force, such a crucial means for why this town needs Batman.
I really liked in this, and I wish it carried over into the film a little bit more, the explanation as to, it wasn't just the scar that was going to hide who he was. It was also this making sure to pop into the hotel and just being there when, we've got a potential for a Hollywood rumor mill was enough, especially nowadays. This is where this felt very contemporary reading it again. I'm like, oh my gosh, this with TMZ and stuff like that would so happen today. Him just being there would generate the rumors. There would be pictures of him going into the hotel, her being checked in there. And this was stuff that wasn't in the animated release, and I get that. They have to really start being conscientious about, like, how much internal dialogue can we put in? We want to keep the story moving. We've got to stay under a time limit, so I get it. And it didn't ruin the animated feature for me, but I really appreciated reading the internal dialogue in this because it added more this sense to me of how he was able to cover this up and fool people like Gordon. And there's always been that feeling of, does Gordon know, doesn't he know? But when you read stuff like this, you're like, it's not whether or not Gordon knows. It's whether or not Gordon's got enough reason to believe that the other option is possible, that it isn't Bruce Wayne. The clues can always be there, and that's okay. But if you can still on some level believe that, this means that it's probably not him, there's something that works about that. And I really enjoyed when I was reading this one that I'm like, I get why he's able to get away with it because he went to these kind of lengths to cover it up. It's one panel of dialogue. But it was funny how in this one it really struck me and stood out that, like, this wasn't in the animated feature, and it's important.
Big time. Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And it's one of the things I really also enjoyed, to going along with is his comment about how it's a single, memorable, distracting detail. That massive scar on the face would draw your attention. There's been numerous robberies and actually professional hits where they do one big bold item and and everyone only sees that. There was a very famous mob hit where they wore the big white Russian hats, broad daylight, walked up to the guy, shot the guy. Every eyewitness, all they remembered were those big white hats. They couldn't remember anything of a person's face because it's got to be something that draws your attention. Everybody who recalls seeing Bruce will only remember that scar. They won't remember anything else about his face. They won't remember any details about him or anything. They will remember that scar, and it's that single memorable detail.
Amen.
And I love that.
Yeah, amen. I totally agree with you 100%. That was something that really stood out for me in all this, is just how well that played out in this particular storyline. And I was geeking out as I was rereading this again. I was so glad this felt timeless because I have fond memories of this, reading it, when it came out. And to be able to read it again now, so many years later, and to just get that same kind of... I don't know, maybe I even liked it more now. I don't know why. I think maybe the appreciation of how timeless it is. This is something that worked so well in both the animated feature, The Beatdown, where Gordon stands his ground. And really, you get to see his training. The fact that he's able to hold his own for a certain amount of time, considering the overwhelming numbers, but then the numbers took him over. That, to me, is more admirable, because I think he knew he wasn't going to win. I think he knew that I've got to do everything I can in this moment. He could have just given up, but he didn't do that. He needed to stand his ground. And I so wanted to see from this the ultimate payback, like to see Gordon be able to, take it out and, hold it. The second he said Flask there, I'm like, I want to see him go after Flask. And I love that that's where the story leads. But it doesn't matter if you don't see this first. This is a great sequence.
Oh, big time. And the fact that Gordon does get the beat down eventually, they do land the punches, adds to realism to this. Because you're looking at, those 4 of them on Gordon? Yeah, Gordon's got training, he's got skills, but he's up against 4 guys with bats. There's gonna be, they do have the advantage, and they should eventually get the heads up on them. Especially, you think those were all cops, so they also have some physical training. They do have some combat skills, and they're, when you get into a fight a lot of times with people, when you first do that initial reaction, when you do that first initial fight back, you run into a moment where you have this group coming in where you have all this confidence. Yeah, we're gonna do a beatdown here. And when they find out that their enemy isn't just gonna lay down and get timid, the guys who have the advantage sometimes hesitate. They sometimes back down. And that's how a lot of times you can actually defeat a larger group. Well, these are all cops. They're going to have a moment of pause, but they're going to still continue on with the fight. They're not going to back down. They're not going to run away. So Gordon has that initial hit, an initial fight, but eventually they take him. And I thought that, again, really cool, realistic moments. And I enjoyed the fact that he knows it's Flask. And just like you, I'm anticipating the beatdown. I'm anticipating the retaliation because it's going to be something cool.
I loved the sequence where Bruce was in the East End for a number of reasons. First of all, it brought Holly into the story. Which, do you remember Holly when she eventually took over and became Catwoman?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Which is really great that so much out of this, so many characters out of this. Holly, Sarah Essen, these are characters that lived beyond this story and actually developed a much more fleshed out history to them. I really love that creators took these characters and did something with them. But in this sequence, you kind of learn why Bruce is always trying to think one step ahead of everybody. That's one of the things I like about Batman today. You always know Batman's got a plan, and he's always thinking 3 steps ahead strategically from everybody else. When you see the fact that he has this confrontation, and it's the one thing where Selina's even looking at him going, you're crazy. But he sees this where you've got this young girl who's in this situation where Bruce is like, let me try to be an agent of change here. And it's so clear that he doesn't have the experience to do it yet. He sees the situation escalating, trying to do what he can to avoid that, but knowing it's becoming more and more inevitable. Thinks that the girl's going to somehow be grateful, right? Instead, she stabs him. To me, I thought this works on so many levels reading it today. Because you can look at Batman today and go to yourself, this is why he's the way he is. Because when he was inexperienced, he knew if he wasn't thinking ahead of everybody else and planning for every eventuality, he's going to get stabbed in the leg. And I think these are important moments to connect to today because it gives you an idea why the man thinks the way he does. And I think it works even better today with what we've seen with the character's history and development, which I think is great. I think it's great that a story from the past can have so much relevance to today's story. I know Scott Snyder's going to be doing a year of Batman Year Zero that's coming up. I think that's what it's called, right? Year Zero? I don't know. He's doing that. It's a long storyline going to Batman's past. And I know just from the interviews with him about this storyline how much Year One means to him. So it's going to be great to see if he goes, I'm guessing, the Jeff Johns route, where we're maybe doing it his own way. Wouldn't be fair to say that, of, re-looking at what the early days of Batman were like in relation to the New 52. I'm sure without retreading this ground. I think what he's going to do is probably build upon this versus taking it down. And I'm going to be very curious to see how he handles it, because I think this story is incredibly relevant today. And this feels like the same guy we're reading today.
Oh, definitely is. Definitely has that same vibe to it. And again, this was the moments of the inner dialogue that I really wish we could have gotten more in the animated series, in the animated sequences, because we got some, and it did some basic mentions, but just Bruce's breakdown and analyzing of everybody as it's going down was something I really enjoyed, especially his knife fight with the pimp. You sit there, he goes, oh, I give the slight look away. He keeps looking, his eyes keep darting from me to the girls back and forth. Quick look away. Dead giveaway. He knows the knife's coming. He's quick. But you can see Bruce sliding out of the way. And I love just that whole sequence. Visually, it was cool to see on the screen, but also just hearing Bruce's analysis of this. And then, as it goes on, even with, when he gets stabbed in the leg, it's everything that broke down here was just a great a great, introduction into why Bruce becomes Batman. Especially that one line, he's like, very good, Bruce. You really put the fear of God into them. Right as the group is jumping on him, he's got a knife sticking in his leg. He's got one dude on the back, another one, and he's just, he has to throw down. He's like, I got to get out of here, drawing too much attention. I love just the introduction of the concept of, I have to put fear in them. I have to make them afraid of me.
Now, where the animated feature, I think, worked a little better in this sequence, because I actually agree with everything you're saying about the dialogue and all that and his analysis. I agree with that. But there are areas where I think the animated feature, because it was able to be animated, the sense of numbers, I thought, was a lot more prevalent in the animated feature, where the sense that Bruce was surrounded, because you had that wide shot of, like, everybody around him. After Holly stabbed him and she said, get him, you really had this sense of, wow, there's a lot of people here. And that Bruce was really, because of the fact that he is such a skilled combatant, even after being stabbed in the leg, was able to hold his own, and not even just hold his own, to dominate. But then, the one part that I really thought even better was captured on the animated film was the sense of Selina as a combatant. When she came down, their fighting sequence felt much more extended in the animated feature. And that's not a knock on this in any way, shape, or form. It's funny how I really feel my recommendation would be for anybody who's read this, you have to see the animated feature. And if you've seen only the animated feature, you have to read this. Because I think there are things in this, because of the nature of it being a comic book and the narrative that you're talking about, I think you get some expanded internal dialogue that I think really just fleshes out this even more. I think there are certain sequences in the animated feature that are actually fleshed out more in the animated feature because of the fact that it has the advantage of motion that I think work better there. I thought the actual fight itself in the animated feature felt more substantial. And I think it was I don't think that's a fault of the comic, and I don't mean that as a negative, because I think it's brilliantly laid out here. I just think the fact that you're able to see that in the animated feature play out that way, I think there's a perfect marriage here of seeing that, hearing that dialogue here in your head, and then seeing all that play out in the animated feature that just can't be missed.
Yeah, and it was a really cool fight sequence to see. But the one thing that I kind of missed, I wish in the animated we would have had more inner dialogue of Bruce breaking down Selina's fighting to show that she's not just somebody who can, throw a punch or a kick. She's actually had formal training. She's actually gone through some stuff, and she actually knows what she's doing. Visually, we got to see that. Visually, that was a beautiful fight sequence. I really like and appreciate when they have these, animated fight sequences with the voice actors where they got to put the, those sound effects as they're punching, and just that kind of that grunt as you're kicking, and just how the voice actors were able to really time that, and just it felt really true and accurate to an actual true fight. And I thought that was a cool physical visual stuff. Just I don't know, there's just something I wish we had a little bit more, just a little bit more in the animated series, and it would have put it over the edge. I would have been like, oh my god, it's amazing. But again, there's time limitations, there's restrictions and whatnot that you can do on the stuff, so I understand. But again, everything you're saying with, if you've only seen one, you gotta, if you've only seen the movie, you gotta read. If you've only read, you gotta see the movie. Because this was a cool sequence where knowing everything that happens and then physically seeing it, you're like, oh, that was cool. That's neat.
And I agree with you that there were some things that I think were left out of the animated feature, but I do think the animated feature did extend certain things well. That is surprising considering, the time limitations. They were able to do that, and I thought it did a really good job of taking some things that I'm like, wow, I wanted to see more of this, and I'm glad the animated feature did that. One area where I thought it did it as well, I love in the book this sequence where Bruce is shot. In the animated feature, for some reason, because of the fact that you had motion, you got this idea this guy had completely stopped from the motion. Then he gets shot. And for some reason that stood out to me more than even it did in the book. And it played out very well in the book, but the fact that you got to see, okay, this guy just was in full-on combat, and he actually stopped. There was no reason to shoot him. And he was so blatantly shot there. But then you have this great situation that, totally plays out very similarly in both the comic, when, he's arrested and pulled in the vehicle, and telling them, you two, stop the car, get out. Yeah. And, the I warned you. I liked in the animated feature how you saw him look back in the vehicle and see the two hurt police officers. I would have almost liked to have seen in both features him pull them out. You didn't need to because you got the verification later that the two officers were found unconscious. And you get some of that dialogue from Gordon as well, with this idea that, he would do all that. But I particularly liked how that played out. There was something about that just really worked for me in both versions. But I actually liked the addition of an additional scene where you saw him look in and see the two hurt police officers inside the vehicle. I don't know why. I just liked the visual in my mind that this is who he was going to go grab, and their condition that they couldn't get out on their own.
Yeah, I like the corruption of the cops aren't just on the high level. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing this is systematically. These are a bunch of cops. They went through the wallet looking for ID and, of course, money, and they were going to take whatever they found, and they found neither, so this is probably a nothing. Do we really want to go through all the paperwork of, let's just let them die in the car? And I love seeing just that this is such a corrupt town that this is normal. You got two regular, just beat cops right here. They're like, no biggie. They're not thinking anything of this. And again, you got to have an understanding why this town so needs Batman. Right here. This is your foundation. This is your rock of your city. Has no issues with not only shooting an unarmed man who had surrendered, but we're going to just let him bleed to death in the car.
Here's a sequence that I really liked better in the comic. I liked when the cars cross paths. Bruce and Gordon's. And I like that Gordon is so driven because, after what just happened, his family's been threatened. He's been threatened. He can't let this stand because this is a pivotal moment where it sets the tone. If he lets them run over him, they own him. He's got to show them that you do not want to mess with me. And who does he got to go after? Flass. We knew that. It's something we read and enjoyed. I loved how this played out. But I loved that when he sees that moment, maniac almost hit me. Should arrest the clown. No way to treat a Porsche. But then you see that, one of the other drivers, because of the fact that they're so familiar with Gotham, this is Bruce Wayne. They would know, similar to how we've got, TMZ now. Back then, he's somebody who would appear in the paper. He's news. So you know that this guy's made public appearances in the Porsche. And this does give a sense that time has passed since he landed in that plane, which we've seen from the dates, which is something I really liked. Did the animated feature, I didn't have the dates, did it?
No, the animated feature didn't have the dates, and I wish it would have.
Yeah. But I like that time passage there, because to me, when we get to this point in the comic book, and you see that the people, okay, I get this. This guy's been around long enough that he would have had pictures in the paper. Because there is a whole section, at least back then, there were major sections of the paper devoted to around town and that type of thing. And Bruce Wayne would be featured prominently for his philanthropic efforts, especially when the guy is going out of his way to make sure that he's seen as a cover. So there was something about that I felt like it just added to me this sense of he's really doing this. He's really making sure people see the Bruce Wayne persona, the playboy out and about.
Oh, yeah. And again, it was I'm going to echo a lot of your sentiment on how I loved seeing Gordon in this sequence, especially because the fact that narrowly narrowly avoiding the Porsche kind of gives him that, that adrenaline rush and keeps him going. Because Gordon took a heavy beatdown, and he even comments how they did just enough to keep him out of the hospital, but they did do a lot of damage to him. He's hurting bad, but he's got to take care of this now. And as he gets there at the house, as he's sitting there waiting for him, he's just watching him one by one leave until Flass is there, until it's time, because he knows Flass is the one he has to take out. The other ones, I put a beat down on Flass, the others will fall in line. I love just how he's sitting there staking it out, getting ready for what he's got to do. This was, again, such increasingly anticipation as you're going through this. Even up until this point, I'm like, oh yeah, here it comes. Oh yeah, and it just keeps building and building. And just, these are some cool art sequences where I love the fact that one where it's mostly shadow image of Gordon's face. It's all the blue and the black, and kind of there's some purple tones in there as well, where it's just that complete, the shadows covering face, but you can still see the intense look in his eye. He's got the cracked glasses. He's ready for a beatdown, bat in hand, and I'm just like, oh, this is awesome.
Now, I liked in the film where this is an example of where the film expanded something. I liked in the film where we got to see Gordon's car waiting out there for Flass, and Flass pull away and Gordon's car quietly start following after him. I liked seeing the car knock him off the road. Everything that played out there, I liked seeing the visual of that. And that was something that was more of an expanded sequence because they were able to have the advantage of motion. And there was something that just worked really well in an animated feature, seeing how Flass was in the incapacitated initially version that he was in, giving Gordon the chance to get sort of the drop on him, but then choosing not to take that, to show Flass just, hey, you need to understand, you may not like me, but you're going to respect what I bring to the table, and you are going to be cautious from here on out, because you come after me again, you're going to get worse. And there was something about that in that moment for Gordon, to say, this isn't about me going to internal affairs right now. This is not about me telling on you. This is not about you having one up on me, holding something over my head. I'm not going to give you any of that in this moment. You're going to see right now who the biggest dog in the yard is. And there was something about him needing to do that. It was a pivotal choice. It was a risky choice. But the payoff of knowing at the end, I know guys like Flass. He is not going to want to tell anybody what really happened here, because he totally loses everything that he's got in power in this moment. And there was something, again, this is one of those sequences where I really felt that there was a lot brought to the table by the book, a lot brought to the table by the animated feature, and if you look at both together, it's kind of like the perfect version of this. Independently, though, it's like they need that thing that both of them have together. I think that's really great about having the animated feature with this now. There's a lot of complementary things that go along between the two.
Oh, God, yeah. That was that was very satisfying on both ends, in the comic as well as the visual of the movie. Just we get that moment of seeing Gordon just lay the beat down. And I love the dialogue where he's talking, I don't crack his skull. I don't crush his larynx. I hit him just enough to keep him out of the hospital. Same thing that Flass's boys did to Gordon. Gordon is doing it by himself to Flass, especially just that tossing him the bat, saying, it's been years since I took down a Green Beret, but at least he still needs to have a little, to make this a fair fight. I loved that moment of just the fact that Gordon knew he was going to take this guy. He had to take this guy, and it wasn't just about puffing up his chest and saying, hey, look at me, I'm a big man. No, this was about keeping his family safe. And even just, especially love the fact they brought that point home where he says, he will leave me alone. He will leave my family alone. Thanks, Flass. Thanks for showing me what it takes to be a cop in Gotham. You got to get a little bit dirty. You got to get you can't run at things completely by the book, which again opens up the fact that he would accept this vigilante into, his life. He will accept and work with this guy, because he's learning, hey, Gotham's a different type of town. You gotta handle it a little bit different. Right here was the Gotham way of handling a corrupt, crooked cop. You give him a beat down, you show him who the top dog is. You're gonna fall in line, or you're gonna get more of this.
Now, here's a sequence that ends off the issue that, quite frankly, I thought the animated feature did an admirable job but I don't know how anybody could ever bring this to life with the same kind of resonance. Father, I'm afraid I may have to die tonight. I've tried to be patient. I've tried to wait, but I have to know. How, Father? How do I do it? What do I use to make them afraid? If I ring this bell, Alfred will come. He can stop the bleeding in time. Another of your gifts to me, Father. I have wealth. The family manor rests above a huge cave that will be the perfect headquarters. Even a butler with training in combat medicine. Yes, Father, I have everything but patience. I'd rather die than wait another hour. I've waited 18 years since Zorro, the Mark of Zorro, since the walk that night, and the man with frightened, hollow eyes and a voice like glass being crushed, since all sense left my life. The visuals of this, Jim, without warning it comes, crashing through the window of your study and mine. I've seen it before somewhere. It frightened me as a boy. Frightened me. Yes, Father, I shall become a bat. And seeing him grab the bell. Just the way that played out dialogue, visually, it's funny how, again, and it amazes me the comics are able to create this sense of motion and movement and things like that. And I thought the animated feature did a great job with this sequence of events, but this is like a Death Star of sequences that are so iconic, and the dialogue was perfect, the visuals were perfect. This is an example of a creative team who just did something that just makes you in awe every time you read it. Right here. I would not want to try to bring this to life with animation or with a person.
Yeah,
you just can't. It's like, and that's not taking anything away from the animated feature. I thought it was great in the animated feature, but this is one where I definitely give it to the comic book because it's like, what? It's one of those sequences.
Oh, definitely. And it's the funny with Batman. This is such an iconic. Images. These are such basic of everything that we all know about Bruce, everything we know about Batman. We've seen this in multiple stories being told, but every single time, if the creative team gets it right, you really get an emotional response. And we both obviously got an emotional response watching this, listening. Well, I keep saying listening to the dialogue, but in reality, I'm reading it, but I'm hearing it in my head. I'm hearing the voice of Batman. I'm hearing everything that rings out, and it really pulls out just a true and honest reaction. I was like, man, this is awesome. This is right here, the moments of the birth of the Bat, and it cracked me up how long into this first year that it was until Batman actually was born. He came to Gotham. He's been hanging out for a couple months, waiting for the right moment. Now is that time. Now is the moment. Now is the birth of the Bat.
Not laughing. In 1987, comics were 75 cents.
Yeah.
I'm looking at this cover. This is one of those covers for me. And I don't know when in my life I realized, because I know in 87 I couldn't have put a finger on this, but what it was about certain Batman covers that made them stand out for me, I can tell you now. I am a huge fan of when artists play around with cool ways to use the cape, where the cape becomes this visual shape that you can do amazing things with that just make you go, oh, that's cool. There's something infinitely cool about Batman's cape. And you see it even with the logo, how they play around with the logo, where you've got the bat symbol around the word Batman. But when you see him with his two fists out and that cape surrounding him, this is one of my all-time favorite Batman covers. And just seeing it here, I think the color work is brilliant. The design is brilliant. It just feels, I know we use the word iconic, or we're going to be using it a ton on this episode, but this cover in particular stands out as being one of those where, again, I remember the artwork from Daredevil, and just seeing it here, and just how much creators will take and recognize we're dealing with a different character now. And we can do some of those cool tricks that we did with Daredevil, but we have to change things up, do things a little different. Color tones are going to be different. The stance, the way the character carries themselves, what they use to be street level is going to be so much different in Batman's world. And that really worked here. There was just something about that cover that I loved the use of the purplish tones and just how everything worked. And it was just a great cover. It's one of my favorite of all time. We get to April 4th, and we're back to Jim Gordon. Just this sense of just how overwhelming life can be. You know, and I like the fact that it's a day in the life of Jim Gordon at first. Then all of a sudden something comes over the airwaves, and he's got to make a decision on how he's going to react to it. But when he hears that you've got corruption on the scene and somebody who is bound to just start shooting things up for the sake of shooting them up, he knows there's a better way to handle this hostage situation. Which, I guess, how do you, I guess you're a little bit better at this than I am. How do you term a situation like this? Because this is somebody who is mentally imbalanced, right?
Oh, yeah.
So... You know, it's a hostage situation, right? But how do you do it when it's somebody mentally imbalanced like this? Do you take it the same way as when it's somebody that's a little more cognizant of what they're doing? I guess, you know, it's so crazy in this one. I don't know if it's labeled any differently than just that. It seems like it should be labeled something else because this guy is so mentally imbalanced.
Yeah, when you're dealing with the crazy people and it's a known crazy person, that completely changes a lot of the story and how you actually have to handle it. Because your normal negotiation, skills really don't work for a guy who's sitting there, what were some of the defibrillator? Doesn't smell often, too many guns. Okay, how do you negotiate with that guy? It's a tough situation. But on one hand, a lot of people will say you negotiate with a bullet. And others say, no, you can't put the hostage at risk. And there's different ways to deal with nut jobs like this. And that's part of the problem that we have in a lot of cities. There's a lot of these guys who are out there and on the streets that you run out of the space for them. You run out of ways to take care of them. You run out of things you could do with them because you can't just lock them up and lock them away in a place like Arkham Asylum. But can you release them on the street? Can you? What's the answer? There's, it ends up being a difficult situation. But the fact that one of the things about this that really, I love the fact that, as you mentioned, there was this calm kind of moment, but then it kind of escalates, and then it really goes to the extreme when we see Braden and his SWAT team are on the scenes. These guys are extreme. They're going to shoot first, ask questions later, but it's not even just shoot first. It's shoot everyone in that area. Those hostages are dead. Anybody in that, that room that's near this guy are dead. So it goes even beyond just a strategic, sniper shot dropping the guy. These guys are, high adrenaline, high energy. They're the extreme junkies who want to, kick in the door and start shooting before they try anything else. And I loved seeing just how Gordon had to get there first. He had to be on the scene. He had to take it over before Brady and his crew can do it. And that was something I really enjoyed. I was like, yeah, that's, again, cool Gordon moments showing him as a good, honest cop.
Yeah, and that was something that really stood out for me as being something special here. Was that moment where you choose to drop the gun. And this is one where I agree with everything you've said about like the internal dialogue sometimes working better in the comic. I do think it worked here better. I also liked in the animated feature, though, how when he looked into the room, he saw the other kids, which you don't see in the comic. This sense of just how many. And I think it was something where because they weren't using the internal dialogue, they had to come up with a way to show that visually. So I think that was for some reason, I just thought it was a great partnership of seeing that in the animated film and then appreciating the internal dialogue of what it looked like here. It was another one where I'm like, you really need to see both because they really do show different things. I also thought the wife watching in the animated feature, they zoomed in on her more, and I felt like there was a greater sense of fear and worry on her face than there was in the comic. And I liked that. Jim's internal dialogue, I thought worked much better in the comic. I liked the visuals at certain points better in the animated feature, only because I think they took the greatness that was already here and expanded upon it. So it's not a knock on the comic. I just loved some of the things they did there where they're like, we can't show this. We can't show the internal dialogue, because it's all going to be dialogue then, instead of moving you along with some cool animated action. And I thought the choices that they made in this sequence worked depending on the medium.
Yeah, it's, again, this was a difficult balance because there is so much inner dialogue going on. How do you relate a lot of this? And I think, again, cool visual sequence with Gordon doing the, knocking the guy out, and just as you mentioned with the zoom in on, on Barbara and everything. But I kind of do chuckle just when you start thinking about the circumstances and what he's got to deal with and everything all the problems he has, dealing with Flass and that crew and everything. And he's got to deal with the guy saying, no lunch, no gangrene lunch, spider, nasty, don't noise it. Like, oh man, you just want to say, dude, why are you still in this town? Go to another town. Go to Metropolis. Go to Cleveland. Go anywhere other than Gotham, because you really got just beyond a difficult job. Being a cop is a very difficult job. Being a cop in a big city is really nasty. Being a cop in a big city like Gotham, that takes it to a whole nother level of, oh man, really? I got to deal with this today. And I loved seeing how this goes from this moment to seeing Gordon on the firing line and just everything that's panning out. He does this incredible thing here. He does this great thing where he stops this crazy guy, saves a room full of children, becomes a hero in the media, but he still has garbage he's got to deal with. He still has problems he's got to, throw down with. He still has just this life where he's like, man, this really, really stinks.
What I really loved here in the book, that I think it develops well, is the sense that he and his wife do not talk about this stuff. Because I think his internal dialogue shows just how deep these emotions are ingrained in him. About hating his job, hating the gun, just how overwhelmed he is with everything surrounding him, yet he keeps going because he has to keep going and he can't explain why. These are things he doesn't vocalize to her. And just how much his past plays into all this. He isn't vocalizing this to her. We never see that happen. And this does start to build, I think, when we get to the parts with Essen, it starts to build where, there's a disconnect between him and his wife, and they need to be able to open up to each other. And as a couple, I don't know if they're ever going to be able to, in the way, because I think that he isn't able to do that. He has this need to protect her from all of this. I don't think he looks at her as strong enough to handle any of this, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's even fair. I think it's not so much that he looks at her as weak as much as he looks at it as his responsibility to protect her. So because of that, I think, it's not her fault. And to a certain extent, it may not even be his fault. He's trying to, in an era where, he's got to be the man and he's got to take up the responsibilities, kind of keep that from her. So I think I'm going to, take back what I said and modify it a little bit and say that it's not really anybody's fault. Because I don't consider her a weak woman by any stretch. She tries to be there. She tries to be supportive. He's not letting her in. And I get why. I don't know that you could in this, because I'm thinking back late 80s. I don't know. It wasn't as cool, right? Yeah. To open up and be in touch with your emotions. You had to be the man of the house and that type of thing. So I don't know. I get how this sequence goes. So I'm trying to defend him. I'm trying to defend her. But what I'm definitely seeing here is a broken relationship where she doesn't share her fears. He doesn't share his fears. So she's not saying stuff to him which is really clear. They don't have two-way dialogue, I guess is what it's a very lengthy way of saying that. But I think it's pivotal to this storyline because I think it's brilliantly handled. And I think the animated feature does a great job of this too, but I think there's some internal dialogue here with Gordon that further adds to his feelings that I really enjoy, that for some reason build this foundation as to why he would eventually head down the path that he did with Essen. And I think this sequence is pretty pivotal here.
Oh, God, yeah, because that was something that I really had issues, and it took multiple read-throughs for me really to be okay, and I'm not completely okay, but there is, with the affair between him and Essen, just because you look at his wife, and his wife hasn't done anything wrong. He shouldn't be cheating on her. This is a woman who's been put in a bad situation and who seems to be handling it well. But it is the breakdown of the communication. It is Gordon's hatred for himself. He really just, it's one of those, you can see it with his dialogue, how he hates the job. He's like, how did I let this happen? How did I screw up so badly to bring an innocent child in a city without hope? And just he's beating up himself. And I think that's where Essen comes into play, where she's able to give him, just that positive hope. Because every time he's looking at Barbara, he's seeing all of the stuff that he failed with, all the stuff that he's, the mistakes he's made. And it kind of, now it doesn't justify an affair, that's wrong. But it does kind of explain why this honorable, honest, good cop would do something like that. This isn't about, this is about him. And I don't even think I'm explaining it correctly, but it's more about, he's trying to find something out of there, something in this city that is, that is bright, that is, light, that is good. And it is in this wrong relationship that he gets that. And I think that's kind of the struggle and the dynamics that Gordon has with this. And it's something that I really enjoyed in seeing as this story is going on. You see the breakdown of Gordon. You see just how much despair he has. And then he starts getting positive stuff when she's in play. And everything starts kind of going more positive for him. So you kind of understand it.
See, for me, I think one of the things that stuck out this time is there was that pivotal event that happened where he was before. And he's never been the same since. That, I think, led to his sense of inadequacy and this sense of him dragging them down to this. And I don't know that was something that he could ever truly voice to her. He never really did. And once he led them down that path, that led to their communication breakdown. I think circumstances sometimes when people go through a major life transition, they grow distant from somebody. Sometimes those things you can handle it together as a couple and you grow closer. Other times the two people start heading in different directions. Like she's becoming the mother. She's heading in that direction. He's delving more into work, trying to somehow take his responsibilities, but he's never really home. Even when he's there, he's never really home. He's constantly involved with how wrong everything is outside of the home. Because of that, he's totally disconnected in those moments. And the only time he ever seems to really connect is when he and Essen have that moment together. And it takes him down a path that isn't the fault of his wife. I'm sort of justifying his emotions, but I'm not justifying his actions. Like, I agree with you that, I have a lot of trouble with what happened with him. I think I have a soft spot for Sarah Essen as a character, because I know where these two end up going. It is funny how Sarah Essen as a character, since we're talking about her, she was created in this. She has appeared in All-Star Batman and Robin. She also has appeared in things like Dark Knight Returns and stuff like that. So this is a character that has a rich history, but she also was brought into regular continuity. And they brought the character in, and she had a huge number of years with major storylines with Gordon. And I don't know how much I want to go into them here, other than to say that she is a character that appeared in Gotham comics for a long, long time. And I loved that because she was so richly developed here that she did come back again. And she became very important to me. So she's a character in the Batman mythos that I'm very protective of because, like you, I like when we give Jim Gordon a life. And he's not just the guy on the rooftop. There's something more important to that, to me, when you do that. I like when they flesh out Alfred's life, and start to give that he had a family outside of, that there are people that are related to him outside of this. Those type of things are really something that just makes the world feel more natural to me. So I don't know, this sequence really worked for me. I agree with you on my discomfort, but I think the flaws, for some reason, as I was reading it through this time, I'm like, I'm connecting with this guy because I still feel he's this darn good cop, but he's flawed, and he knows he's flawed. He doesn't hide from those flaws. When he starts making the mistakes that he does, he acknowledges them, and eventually he comes clean. I like that he came clean at a time where I know he was forced to do it, but I felt like, and I don't know if you feel this way about him, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like he would have eventually come clean on his own.
Yeah. I don't know how it would have played out, but he eventually would have come clean on this. Just because, one, I want to think that's the kind of guy Gordon is, that he would eventually step up and say, okay, you know what, this is wrong. I have to, sometimes you got to pay the piper. And he would have, acknowledged, okay, now I have to do this. But I do like how it got brought out in the book, how it, his timing and everything, that why it came out and why it came out when it came out.
Yeah, I agree. That was, and I'm not giving him a pass at all, so please don't take me wrong on this, because I think what he did was wrong. But there was some reason about it that I think what I liked about it is it felt human. You know, he felt like a guy who, like, you know, we all have people that we respect where you find out they do something really boneheaded, and you can acknowledge the person that they are in spite of the thing that they've done. And that's what happened to me with this. So I don't know if you felt that way, but that's kind of like how it worked for me. And it leads to talk about another flawed event in a different kind of way. We see Batman, like, take on 3 thugs, which, for us, Batman taking on 3 guys, no big deal. But it was a great example of him not quite knowing yet how to make all of that work. He's getting hit in the head with a television, and and what I love about these thugs are, they're so panicked, they could care less about their friend in that moment. They're not panicked and thinking, pull him up, pull him up, pull him up. If I got to hit this dude with a TV, this is Batman. This is some human bat thing that's like flown in here now. We've heard this is a legend. You know, it's an urban legend. We know very little about him. I don't know how much he would be known on the street. You'd be pretty freaked out by this guy. So him hitting him with a TV and all that, like, just seemed to work for me. And, you know, again, show how Batman left himself in a situation where he was vulnerable, not being aware of his surroundings, which kind of goes back to stuff from Batman Begins that I liked. You know, you still should be aware of your surroundings, that type of thing that was going on from Liam Neeson. There's something about that I really liked.
Oh, God, yeah. And it's funny because, you know, Bruce makes the mistake by when he engages the enemy. His initial appearance freezes him. It's perfect timing on that. But he's on this fire escape where one kick, one hit, the one guy jumping back is what throws him over the edge. You know, Bruce should have waited until the guys climbed down the stairway and then popped in on him and then done the startling and then take them out. And it's him learning. He's got to stumble, you know, he's got to build up, you know, to the point where he knows exactly how to react. How are the bad guys going to react? How are they going to, you know, what's my best, avenue of approach? Again, it adds realism to this comic book that he's not hitting the ground perfectly. It's not everything's going exactly as planned. No, there are going to be stumbles, there's going to be slips, but in the end, he's getting it done. He's learning from the mistakes, and he's moving forward.
This bit with Detective Essen, and where they're sitting there having this introduction to her. This is one, it's funny. With certain sequences with Essen, I think that they worked better in the comic, and with certain ones, I think they worked better in the animated feature. I thought in the animated feature, her introduction was better. I think there was just more of an opportunity to hear the cat calls and stuff like that, but also for her to have more of a vocal presence. But then there's parts later where I think the comic nailed, especially when it gets to the conclusion of their relationship, I thought the comic nailed that even better. So, because it gave a greater sense of just how hard that was. So this was a great example of where I'm very torn on where it worked better. But, and again, I think that there's just a great... I think one of the things I liked about the animated feature with this is I felt like none of it contradicts each other. So where one like does more internal dialogue or different visual sequence in the comic than the film, I feel like those things still happen. You know, and the same thing with if something is expanded a little bit more in the animated feature, I feel that those still happened in relation to the comic. They're off panel. So I think these two work so well together and are so well crafted. And I think this is a testament to the animated feature. There was never a point in time where the animated feature went off and did something that I'm like, that didn't happen in the comic book. And that's, I think, a key to why I think that they need to both be viewed as companion pieces because of that. I think that they just work really well to somehow flesh out the story and make it come to life.
Yeah, and again, also like the visual sequences of Flash, retelling his encounter with Batman. That was a really cool moment because you got to see more of, just how someone could perceive what they're seeing. Detective Flash is not an idiot, but to him, Batman looked supernatural. There was those moments. I love the fact that, especially the one scene where he's like, the one guy I hadn't disarmed yet produced a hidden weapon and shot at him point blank. It went right through him. He's not human. No, it just went right through the cape. But, in the excited situation, everything's going on, he's not seeing everything clearly. The shadows playing into a factor, just the whole everything going on. And I love this. It always adds to that supernatural element of Batman.
Except, I think Flash probably told a similar expanded story when it came to Jim Gordon. And I think Flash anymore, I agree with what you're saying, but I also saw this. It's funny how this time around I saw another possibility to this. Even if Flash knew it was a man, let's say Flash looked at the situation. I'm going to say Flash is smart. Whether you like him or not, he's smart. I'm willing to bet Flash knows this is a guy, but Flash needs to expand the story because that's what Flash does. Flash needs to keep his own. Like, he recognizes that this visual of him right now is taking down his stock. So I looked at some of this as Flash scrambling to enhance a story, and this is how a legend is built. It's for Batman, anything he can do. And Gordon did this as well. When Gordon beat up Flash, he knew Flash would tell a story that was so exaggerated, that would not include him, that he knew that it would protect his wife, because Flash would never want Gordon to have to tell the truth. That's why Flash would not use Gordon's name. I think that same guy that Gordon relied on to tell the story that he knew he was going to tell there is the same guy telling this story and expanding upon it. I think Flash is a lot more aware of the reality of Batman, and I think he's being caught in his own ridiculous story. I don't know how supernatural. Now, I do think that Flash probably thinks this guy is something more than he is, but he's clearly exaggerating the situation to make himself look better, too. I would be curious to see if we could ever get... Wouldn't it be great to be able to sit down one-on-one with Flash and go, okay, dude, come on. Like that story you told about Batman, what are you really thinking? I think there would be some elements of this that would be true, but I think there's other parts of it where it would be really clear that Flash was exaggerating the situation. I don't know. I loved that because it works on so many levels.
Oh, God, yeah. Again, it's, Flash is just this great character that, and I love this moment here. Flash starts losing he's already started losing his, influence, his pull. There are guys who are now openly laughing at Flash. And when you've built your reputation on fear, when you have your control based on the fact that, oh, that's Flash, you don't want to mess with him, he's hardcore. Well, now they're laughing at him. And it's, getting to a point where that's taking away his authority. That's taking away his position within that department. He now knows that he's not going to be able to completely bully everybody around him. Yeah, there's still going to be, money exchanging hand. There's still going to be the fact that, there's a common goal of, getting rich, and whatnot. But the fear factor that Flash had over these fellow officers, he is losing, if not is completely lost. And that was something I really enjoyed about this sequence because, one, you really see Gordon saying, okay, yeah, go on, Flash, come on, knowing that it's going to further hurt Flash's position in the department, knowing it's further going to weaken him in everybody's eyes. So he's just going to keep giving him more rope to hang himself with. I loved how the little subtle stuff that this played out.
Oh, yeah. And that part I could not agree with more. Gordon, at this point, is using this situation to his advantage to take him down one step further in the way he's carrying himself. Gentlemen, go on, Flash, please. You know that he's just loving this moment because he's got him right where he wants him. And then we shift to May 19th. This is a sequence that, again, to me, fleshing in and out of the animated feature. And I want to just say, whenever I'm giving kudos to the animated feature for its visuals and its expansion, the artwork in this, to me, this art team and their work with Frank Miller and just the storytelling they've told, my respect level for them is through the roof. So, I'm comparing the fact that the animated feature has the option to do motion, how they did a great job at taking their apparent love, their very apparent love for this work and making it come to life. So, to me, any praise that I'm giving the animated feature when I'm doing it really comes from a clear belief that the people who did the animated feature loved this so much and were like, wow, now we can bring this to life and do this thing that they couldn't do in the comic book, but they put in my head. They put in my imagination when they were there. So I feel a lot of that came from the comic, from the imagination that was developed. I love this sequence where he's going around and taking out the chauffeur drivers. Because what I liked about it is it's the stealth side of Batman. And I think this is really, really important. I love the idea of the Bat being this beast. There's something about that I think is really cool. And there's an intimidation factor there that I think just works. But when you take that, you plug in what's going on here with the stealth and the smarts and strategic intelligence of him. This is where you take this martial artist who uses a physical intimidation together with what I think, to me, martial arts, when I think of martial arts, I also think of the knowing where and when to use those skills. And sometimes as a martial artist, you have to know when to pull it back and to calm yourself and analyze a situation. And I'm a big believer in the mental of martial arts. And I feel like these sequences showcase that training as well. And that's something that I just geek out of when I see Batman. This is just, I'm like, ugh, yes, in these sequences. Because it adds just as much, if not more, intimidation by the fact that these people inside there have got nobody to call in for backup at that moment. Anybody they could possibly call has to drive there. Anyone that's on the premises have been taken down. That's great.
Oh God, yeah, yeah. This is one of those classic Batman, scare you into peeing your pants, because I would hate to have been one of those people in that party, just because you're like, what, and just it was a boom, 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 just multiple stages of hitting, and it was a stick and move kind of action. He wasn't in long, but his time in there was effective and efficient, and just it got the point across. Now, this is a sequence, to be honest with you, the first time I read this, I was like, why is he going after? I knew they were corrupt and he had to go after him. Like, why now? He should have, part of me is thinking he should have built himself up, waited, and kept doing what he was doing and spread it out. But then after a couple read-throughs, I'm like, you really get the groove of what Bruce is doing. Bruce realizes he's got to, it's the cut the head off of the snake if you want to kill it. You can't just keep dealing with the smaller elements. Can't just keep dealing with just legend of Batman taking out the crime. You got to go where the true problem is. You really got to go after them and make them hurt. And right here is his declaration of warning to the mayor, to all the councilmen, to everybody, there. It's time. You have eaten well. You have eaten Gotham's wealth, its spirits. You nearly feast. Your feast is nearly over. From this moment on, none of you are safe. I love just how that just played out, and that was it was a cool visual element to see, but it was also just this beautiful image in the comic as it's playing out, because you get the party moments, you can kind of hear the music in your mind as some festive, as they're laughing and joking, drinking wine, and then boom, everything changes. Their world completely is turned upside down. I love this sequence.
I like when he takes down the lights and stuff like that. Those sequences where you get to see him do these little things like to take control of the situation. There was something about that really stood out for me. Because in the film, I thought they did a great job of interpreting this sequence. But there's certain things that they do in the comics where you get to see a little bit more of what Batman was doing behind the scenes that I really like. And that sequence where he says, ladies and gentlemen, you've eaten well, you can't beat that visual there. There's no, how do you take that artistry, try to bring that to life, unless you're the artist who did it?
Yeah.
There's something about that just, my admiration for the animation team is through the roof. What do you do with that? Yeah. That to me should be in a museum. There is comic artwork. There's a lot of comic artwork that I firmly feel should be on display prominently in every art museum. And I think work like this is not as appreciated as it should be. That should be in a museum.
Agree completely with you. Agree 100% on what you're saying. And this is something, I'd like to see a poster, like to see it blown up, like to own, something beyond just this page. And this is actually, some of these sequences are why I wished they had made this absolute, to kind of, make it a little bit bigger, a little bit fleshed out, and a little bit, you could enjoy this artwork a little bit more.
It's funny as you're saying that. I bought, it's like how many times, I've got the hardcover of this, I've got the single issues. Now I have this on my iPad. I bought it from the app. And you can, like, if you pinch your fingers apart, you can increase the size or pinch them together to decrease the size. And I literally, as you were saying that, was zooming in on the picture because you can do it. And I agree with your thinking, like Absolute and stuff like that. This is the type of material that Absolutes were made for. This kind of stuff. And so want to see it. I love the sequence after this with Essen, where you get to see her, they're trying to find a way to bring out Batman. And I love Batman recognizing what they're doing and just kind of like watching it to try and get to know more. I'm a big fan of when Batman gathers information. I think there's something to the character that you always got to believe that whether it's the modern age or not, this guy is, and I think the reason why he has the banks of computers that he does, has Alfred doing the things that he does, has built the relationship with Oracle when that was in play. All of those things were about an increased ability to gather as much intel as possible before you strike. To know as much as you can before you go into a situation so you don't wind up getting stabbed in the leg or hit in the back of the head with a TV. And I that's one of the things that I love about year one. You get an idea why, okay, this guy is recognizing in these events that there's inherent flaws in the way that he's operating, and he cannot afford to operate that way in order for him to complete this mission that he set himself on. And I love that. There's something about that just works for me. And I know it stood out in this.
One of the things that, when he's observing, the fake mugging of Essen, one of the things I liked is the fact that how he comments on the fact that, she can walk in heels. So few women know how to do this. And he's just talking about how, and it's what separates her from who would be just a regular everyday person walking down the street. It kind of gives her this reasoning why he would know this is an ambush. Then even in the book, how he says, and there's this cop, there's this guy, and he starts naming where all the people are. The visual element of the movie was cool in this sequence, seeing this, but you really get a better picture why Bruce knows this is a trap in the comic. And this is, again, something that the comic played out really nice in that we get to see his mind and how Bruce thinks and how Batman thinks and how he's acting and how he's analyzing everything.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. And as, Gordon is trying to figure out who Batman is, going to people like Harvey Dent, I thought was really great. Harvey Dent wasn't overused in this. He was used what I felt was an appropriate amount. Then you build on, when you read stories like Long Halloween, which clearly takes place after this, it's great to kind of see this and then see that same Harvey Dent in Long Halloween. And there's iconic stories that DC has produced that need to be a part of their history still. And I'm very anxious to see when Scott Snyder does his, Year Zero kind of thing. Is that what it's called? I'm still wondering if that's what it's called, and I'm drawing a blank at the moment. So,
I'm completely on a blank on this one. So.
Anybody listening to this is banging their head against the wall. If I'm totally 100% wrong, I acknowledge that. He is going back to the early years of Batman for a story arc that he's been wanting to do, and I think that's really cool because I love this era. But I think it's funny how when you and I planned this, we weren't aware of that. It wasn't something that was in the forefront of our decision. And I love kind of revisiting this again because we've done Long Halloween on the show before. And I'd like to, at some point in time down the road, do Dark Victory because it would be fun to do the story that follows up and then the Catwoman story that follows up as well, One in Rome. Because I think this whole era is just an incredibly interesting era to read about in Batman. And there's been so many great, rich stories told that... I don't know, this plays out. I love Batman hiding behind there, knowing that, there's a relationship between Dent and Batman that predates his relationship with Jim Gordon.
Yeah, and, it's funny. I liked in the movie how he wasn't hiding under the desk, but he was actually hiding out of outside the window. For some reason, I think that was kind of it seemed more Batman-esque, him hiding outside the window as opposed to him hiding underneath the desk.
And, that was with Jim Gordon in the movie.
But in...
Oh, you're talking about in the animated feature. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Batman Begins. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't seem like Batman to be hiding under the desk.
Right.
I'm with you. That's a good point. You know what? I'm going to be honest with you. For as many times as... Because I've watched that movie now 3 times. I I didn't really acknowledge that difference until you're mentioning it right now. I'm like, wow, you know what? He's right. That was where he was. I guess it didn't hit me. I prefer that. I'm with you. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something I totally wasn't. I'm aware that it's there, obviously, because the second you said it, I'm not ready to contradict it because I'm like, no, I remember that. I agree with you. Wow. I prefer that better. Yeah, I don't see Batman as much as coming out from under his desk. Although we can say this is early Batman where he...
Exactly. He's still learning how to, skulk in the shadows.
Wait, well, he went back home after this and goes, man, that was so not cool. I'm never doing that again. Word gets out, I'm hiding under desks. I'm done.
You think he has Chris Farley moments going, stupid, stupid. Oh, what was I thinking?
In this, he has quite a few of them. Which I like. I see, I'm a big fan, like you are, obviously, of the connectability of these characters. I think there's an importance to believe they overcame certain things to get where we expect them now. And when you have opportunity to explore their past and to see them head to the place where they're more veterans like we see them today, that's where history in comics is really important. Being able to read these stories and see them. And I think comics don't need to... there's been a lot of questions come up lately as far as should Batman be jumping back to this era when it's all about the New 52 moving forward. And I get people that think that way. I do. I understand why we want to move, because I like the forward direction of the New 52 as well. So I want to see more of the Batman stories going forward. But I also think there's a point where to get to know a character, it's good to journey to their past and to see this. This story happened at a time where you needed to go to the past to kind of see what does the past look like now. And I think we're in an era right now where it would be nice to journey to Batman's past and see what it looks like now. How does it feel in relation to what we see in the present day? So I'm excited for that for the same reason that I think this story was so valid at the time. And it still holds up to be this valid. Because you can't always assume that everyone has gone back and read all of the older material, all of the classic stories. I think what's really great is when a creator finds a way to tell a satisfying story set in the past that shows something new to longtime fans, but addresses those themes to a new reader as well. And that's something that I think Snyder's going to do really interestingly well. And I can't wait to read that because I enjoyed this so much. Gordon and Essen, seeing the flirtation between them, from her handing him her cigarette.
Yeah.
I'm already tasting her lipstick on the cigarette. Her fingernails bite into my knee. In that moment, her fingernails bite into my knee. We know her here that she's coming on to him, too.
Yeah.
So, you're having this moment where the two of them have this thing going on between them. And, wow.
And here's a weird thing. One of the things that I didn't really notice it until we got this sequence in the movie. Mm-hmm. But they had no cigarettes, no Gordon smoking, none of that in the animated series.
Right.
And I know it's, obviously there's, restrictions and whatnot on viewing, and animated stuff can't have the smoking. And it was something that it didn't, up until this point while I'm watching the movie, it never really dawned on me. It never really hit anything. It was there, but I didn't really comment or see it until this moment, because this was such a actual crucial moment that the cigarette does add to the flirtation, where he's like, I can already taste her lipstick on the cigarette. And it was like, I was like, wow, yeah, they're not doing that. And throughout the entire movie, even the drug scenes with the bad guy later on, they completely cut out any of that stuff from the animated movie.
And I get that, I really do. I don't think it took anything away, and I know you're not saying that. It's funny how this shows how the times have changed from 87. And let me ask you, I guess I'm making the assumption, I don't think it took anything away. Because there could have been other internal dialogue that was put in its place, or something else used in its place. I don't know, I don't know what that would have been. But there was all kinds of ways to do that. I don't feel the cigarette was an issue.
No, I'm in agreement. It's not. I'm not saying it as an issue. I'm just saying this was, and it was funny. This was the point that I noticed it, because that cigarette was so important. Because there was that flirtation notation. There was that, it was beyond just the, S and I could kiss you when she's explaining about Bruce Wayne. She's saying about how the money and the power and what happened to him as a little kid. There was just that a little bit even further beyond it.
Yes.
Adding, it's the slow play, the slow build of their relationship, of their flirtation, of everything that's going on between them. And that was kind of a crucial part of it. So I was like, yeah, okay, this is kind of interesting. And then it's something that dawned on me, and then I was really looking for it later on. And my second watch through the movie, I really noticed that there was a couple other scenes when they really showed it in the comic that they don't show it in the book, in the movie, but it never took anything away from me. I never was like, oh my God, this is so wrong. They're defecating on the art form. Oh, I'm like, no, it was just something I noticed.
No. And I actually agree with all your points about what it did emotionally. I like the sequence where Essen has the gun on Batman. After that whole sequence happens with the crash and everything, she's got the one up on him. And all of a sudden, Jim's ready to, never mind me, don't take your eyes off, stop or all. And he's got the gun up there, holding it right in that sequence. My fingers don't work, those type of things. There was something about that intensity that felt so natural. I like that when Gordon goes back and analyzes all these events, he has almost a visual film director's editing memory where he can pull out sequences and go, he saved this person. He didn't kill this person. He did this instead of that. The cat even. All the little things that he did along the way, saving 2 police officers, saving an old lady. These are things that are themes that keep recurring in Gordon's mind as far as when he's struggling with how to feel about this guy. Because there's that police officer part of him that feels like, this is a vigilante. I need to feel this way about him. But then there's the other part of him that comes back and goes, and I like that. There's something about that. Because it's a pretty big butt in all this, to sit there and go,
God,
yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it's just, again, it's cool moments of Gordon that he is putting the pieces together. And you understand why he does embrace this vigilante. He knows he knows he's not a threat. He's not a bad guy. He risked his own life to just save this old lady. He didn't attack. He didn't hurt. He didn't kill these cops when he could have had the chance. That's not who he is. It's not who he's about. And even as he's recovering from he's got the blood gushing out of the head wound. He's got a head wound solid there. He passed out a little bit. He's still trying to stop, Braden and his goon squad from coming in and killing everybody. He's like, hey, he didn't attack the cops. He hasn't attacked anybody. You can't let Braden go in after him. And I love seeing, Gordon, even though he's weakened, even though he's hurting pretty bad from his own accidents, he's still trying to do the right thing. And he knows Bruce is not a bad guy. He knows he's not this killer. He knows he should be, working with them. And I loved seeing just how that plays out, where Bruce has to scramble. He's got a bullet in the leg. He's hurting bad because, when he knocked the old lady out of the way, that didn't, feel too comfortable. That hurt like heck. He's dealing with a lot of pain. He's just got to push through the pain. He's got to keep moving. He's got to get away. Goes down the blind alley. Crash through the wall there. Do this, and it's just boom, boom, boom. It's that constant, don't stop, keep moving, stick and move type of style that I really enjoyed. And it played out wonderfully in the film. It plays out beautifully in the book. And this is something that, it's when you talk about turning something into an animated, this was a great book to do that to, because there's such these really cool visual elements of it. But this book, the art stylings and just everything, how they laid out the pages and the panels, just really gave me this sense of motion on the pages.
Yeah. And I liked that between the animated feature and this, they looked at this sequence and they said, we've got to thematically keep this sequence the same, but they made some choices in sequencing of how this sequence played out and the length between the bomb being dropped and stuff like that were a little bit different between both. But in the end, it told the same story that I really liked. For some reason, I didn't feel like anything was lost, but the sequence played out slightly differently in the animated. And I liked that. For some reason, that worked for me.
Yeah. Just everything that played out throughout this whole sequencing, even just, with the comic, you get that moment of, where it's the end of the issue, where it's Braden drops a firebomb and just torches the whole building. And I could just imagine, going through this, waiting for now I got to wait another, however long it was 30 days or whatever. You had to wait until the next issue came out. You're like, what? No, you can't leave me on that. And in the movie, that was an issue that hits, and then the action keeps going. That was something I really enjoyed, how they really pulled everything together throughout this, but they still didn't lose the monumentous moment of the boom, the explosion.
Yeah, and that's exactly, for me, what happened. As, when I was reading all this, it was the same thing where, boy, I want to say the wait was longer than that, between issues, and I don't know why. I guess, they were both, one was released in February, one was released in March. So it looks like, I'm looking at the release dates. Yeah, it was at least 30 days. So it looks like the 405 was released February 28th, 1987, and 406 was released March 31st, 1987. I've got to be honest with you, remember reading it, feeling like, this is taking forever, where's the next issue? And I think that says a lot about a comic. It also was an era where I wasn't reading the amount of comics, I wasn't able to read the amount of comics that I am now. So, I did a ton of rereading between issues, where it's like you would pick up issue 1 and 2 and reread, then you just read issue 2, then you go and read issue 1, and then you do the page through the art. And I tell you, I don't think I've ever been able to, time-wise, since look at comics as much as I was able to back here and before, because you didn't have, the financial accessibility to the amount of comics that you do today. And not even just the financial accessibility, it wasn't always easy to find them. Even comic shops in the area sold out of stuff. So they would occasionally do second prints of things, but you had to wait a lot of times. Second prints didn't always come out the following week. Sometimes they were 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. Then you get a second print. Sometimes second prints would sell out. Books would go to third printings, and they were very hard to get a hold of. So if you were not there on the day when the comic came out, and even if you were, books would sell out, and you didn't have the advantage of going online, having as many comic shops as you have today. It also, there was a release difference sometimes between when your local newsstand would put them out and when the comic shop would. So sometimes there would be driving. I remember driving between 7-Elevens and I remember French's Pharmacy nearby here had comics. Revco, which is now CVS, had comics. There was a little drugstore by my mom's house that would also carry comics, and you would do this journey of walking from place to place. Because I remember I would go to the drugstore in what used to be a Lawson's, and then I would walk up to Revco, which was over by a library in Wycliffe. These were this is a big trek to do it. And I remember it was the biggest score in the world if you found the book you were looking for, because they didn't carry everything. And sometimes a book would get hidden behind another book. Sometimes people would hide a book behind other books.
Another book, yeah.
Because, I don't have the money now. I'm going to go home and ask and come back for the... So that was always the trick, too. It was trying to outthink your competitors and trying to nail down this issue. It really was. It was like a scavenger hunt. People would put sometimes comics behind other magazines to try and hide, the comics were always in one area, but there was always one or two really good ones that wound up hidden behind the magazines. And that was a kid who either paged through them just to see what it looked like, and maybe the store person finally just said, hey, you need to go home, or something like that. This isn't a library kid. Or you knew they were hiding it to try and come back and get it, and you, hopefully you had that money in your pocket. But it was a great era with the cliffhanger.
I'm kind of cracking up here because I'm half expecting you to say, yeah, you kids, you have no idea what it was like back in my day. We used to do this. We didn't have this dang-fangled internet where you could order anything you wanted.
Yeah, and I put my teeth in my jar before I started telling that story, too. Yeah, I get it. I was laughing at myself as I was saying it, but it's funny when you're talking about a story, and I agree with you. It's some of that I'm looking back to 87. Some of it I'm going before 87 on what the experience was like. But I shouldn't say that. In 87, it wasn't that different than what I was presenting, again, going from place to place. Except, in 87, I may not have been driving yet. I started driving when I was 17, so I don't think I was driving yet as of when this came out.
Well, and to be honest, I had this issue back when I was in college.
Mm-hmm.
I had the two comic shops in Bowling Green. I went to the one first, and if they didn't have the issue I was looking for, I would go to the other one. And it was always the process of starting at the one and going to the other one next. And it was kind of weird that it was then even actually eventually BG got a third comic shop that I used to go to. So there was like a kind of flip flopping around and just. So even back in the 90s, I was still dealing with that kind of stuff. And it's funny how the internet really changed just how we can get our comics. And even just not even talking the digital stream that we're getting now. I mean, just ordering them online and having them easy delivery to your house and getting it, or, just even the way comic shops now look at stuff where you set up your order and they're pulling stuff aside from you, and they're ordering more so they know which, to make sure that, everybody can get the comics, and you can, set up a pull list with the comic shop. Things are, they look at things differently now than they did back then. It's, and I really kind of like that.
Well, and here's the other issue that they have now. They don't have the kind of walk-in traffic that they did back then. Because comics are more of a niche medium. So, you've got your set customers, and as many of them that have a pull list, it helps them to estimate the right amount to order so that they have maybe a copy or two, a couple copies extra left over. But they don't want to wind up with like 10 extra copies of every book that they order, because probably with a lot of titles, it's really hard to move them afterwards if you have that many. A couple you want to keep in your stack for the walk-in guy, like maybe they're not a regular to that comic shop, but they've been seeking this out. But you don't have that because of the online competition now. You don't have that as much. So the regular brick-and-mortar retailer has to think a little differently in the strategic nature of how they operate. So it's a very different environment now. And for us, without a newsstand, the internet becomes like almost your new newsstand, because you got to go from online shop to online shop, hoping somebody still has it, especially when it's a big seller like this. Jim, what we're going to do right now is, it's funny, we were looking at how to release this. Before Jim and I recorded this, we had a great opportunity to talk with author Tom King. And we talk about Tom with his work on Vertigo's Time Warp, and also with his novel, A Once Crowded Sky. And I think when we're talking so much on this episode about the creative process, it's a great opportunity to then jump from this discussion right now to speak to a writer. And then what we'll do is, on the second part of this, which we'll release separately so that way this episode's manageable for a listening sense, we have some listener voicemails that go along with our anniversary. We also have the remaining 2 issues of this to discuss. We won't be doing this for every part of the Frank Miller discussion, but we feel like for this one, the Tom King discussion is very timely. We want to get that in place. He was very gracious with his time. This will give you about a 4-hour episode here. We can come back with a much shorter episode for the second part, so that way you can get it in manageable chunks and kind of spread it out over time to listen to the show. But I want to caution everybody, if you're listening to this, we always do this anytime we have guests on, there's a little bit of language when we have the Tom King sequence. So if you have little kids around you, you want to jump off with the kids at this part and enjoy the Tom King sequence. He gets really in-depth on the creative process and all that too, and it was an honest, open discussion. It was very cool. I always love this opportunity. We don't get a lot of chances to interview creators. And when they come on, they're usually special friends we made, and Tom is certainly one of those that fits into that category, who come on and get a chance to share their work. And when we have this chance to do it on our show, it's really great. I think it kind of fleshes out a lot of our discussion and helps our thinking a lot of times. So I hope you guys enjoy this one as much as we had a chance to enjoy this. And we'll be back in towards the end of the week with part 2 of this. So here you go.
There it is, going into that tunnel.
We are very lucky to be joined by new friend of the show, Tom King. And Tom, I recently had the pleasure of meeting you at the Comic Geek Speak Super Show, and we got to go to dinner together. It was really great to get to hang with you prior to this, to know what a great guy you are. So welcome to Raging Bullets, and thank you for joining us on our anniversary.
It was quite a pleasure meeting you, and let me just say, first off, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm a fan of the show. I'm a fan of DC Comics, so it's just an honor for me. Thanks, guys.
Very cool. Now, the story we're going to be talking about is It's Full of Demons, and this is by you with art by Tom Fowler, and this is, again, a return pairing for the two of you because you worked together on your book, A Once Crowded Sky. So can we talk a little bit about the genesis of this story? Like, how do you go about when an anthology is coming out? How do you get a story pitched for the anthology?
Yeah, I think basically the way I did it was I failed down into it was my general policy. I aim for the skies, missed, and hit this. So which I think failing upward is generally a good thing in life. Basically, what happened was I had reached out after my novel came out to some DC editors, and I got a response from Karen Berger, who's one of my personal gods of comic books. I'd actually interned for Vertigo back in the day, and I was their copy boy. And she was like 15 levels above me, and I could sort of see her in the clouds, and she'd like sit there. Neil Gaiman would come into the office, and Walt Simonson, when they were just so she was like way off in the sky. I could never even think of talking to her. And she actually reached out and contacted me and said, "Let's meet up. Let's talk. Let's go over some stuff." And I just thought it was going to be at New York Comic Con. I had a table there, and I just thought it would be sort of a, "Oh, hi, my name is Tom King. I'm not a super crazy person. Let's shake hands and we'll email later." Not that I'm not a super crazy person, but at least I could fake it for the 5-minute meeting, I went and met with her, went and saw the Vertigo panel, and saw her give this great presentation of my heroes of his comic books. And Scott Snyder was going to have a new series. Jeff Lemire was going to have a new series. Azzarello was up there. I was like, oh my God, it's just like, what company to be in. And afterwards, Karen came up to me. I was like, okay, here goes. Shake her hand. Don't act crazy. And then walk out and you win a victory. And she's like, "Oh, Tom, nice to see you. Why don't you take me to your booth and we'll sit down and talk for a while?" I was like, "Oh, what? Talk? What are we going to talk? Okay." And so she comes down, and we go to my booth, and she sits down, and like about 1 minute into the conversation, after the sort of like weather talk, she's like, "Okay, what would you have in mind if you had to do a Vertigo series?" I was like, "What? You want me to pitch here now, utterly unprepared that I am to do any of this?" And at being a writer, I had series in my head, but I was like totally unprepared. And if you're a writer in the audience, you probably had this experience, or if you're a creative type, I started pitching, and about like 3 words in, I mean, not exaggerating, like I hadn't gotten to any of like the articles in the sentence yet. I knew that it was going downhill. Like I could see in her eyes that this was not the idea she was looking for, and immediately I was thinking, oh, I haven't even passed the "I'm not crazy" test of this that I was going to for 5 minutes. And after the pitch went through, and she sort of looked at me, and there's like a long, horrible pause, and she sort of said, "Why don't you try out for our anthology series?" and I was ecstatic because that's sort of where I expected to sort of end up. And so she hooked me up and said I could pitch her ideas for Time Warp. She said it was just a science fiction anthology, just pitch something sci-fi-ish. I'm a huge fan of the old Alan Moore Time series that he did for 2000 AD. So I wanted to do something like that. That's what I sort of had in my head. And I immediately had this great idea, and I was like super excited about it. And I wrote up the pitch for it. And I was like, well, I'm going to go back and read those Alan Moore series and just to refresh it and see how he does these sort of things. And I read them through, and I realized that I was pitching an idea that I had directly stolen from him. And then so I had to throw out all the rest of my ideas, and then the idea for Time Warp just came with me while I was boiling spaghetti, basically. And it was one of those easy ideas where I knew as soon as I come up with it, I was like, oh, they'll take that. That's fine. And it was subtle, and it was humanistic, and I liked it, and I pitched it, and they took it, and I said, hey, would you mind if I give a call to a guy I consider to be one of the modern geniuses, which is Tom Fowler, and see if he'll be willing to draw it. And I called Fowler, and he cussed me out for a while, as he usually does, and after that, he agreed to draw it.
Now, how did your relationship with Tom Fowler get started?
It was through another guy I consider to be a modern master, Mr. Cliff Chang. Mm-hmm. So when I got the deal for Crowded Sky, which is my novel, Once Crowded Sky, I had a certain amount of money they gave me to find an illustrator. And I went to C2E2, and I literally went around Artist Alley, looking at artists' pictures and stuff, and going through and approaching them like sort of my favorite artists and being like, hey, I have this money, this possible commission. Would you be willing to do this to me? And I approached Cliff. He was like my first choice, and he said yes, and it was fucking fantastic. Oh, I'm going to swear. Sorry.
It's all right.
I'm from Los Angeles. I swear constantly. So if the fact that I haven't sworn more is sort of a miracle at this point. And so I talked to Cliff, and we were all going down, and we were going, and he read the book. He liked it. He had some fantastic ideas. And then he got a little project called Wonder Woman, which you may have heard of.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, oh, man, I can't do it. I got this Wonder Woman thing come up. And I was like, oh, dude, you can't. Dude, obviously, you have to do that. And he's like, but I have an idea. It's like, what's your idea? He's like, well, you've sent me a lot of stuff of sort of what you want things to look like. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, the stuff you've sent me is from an artist named Tom Fowler. Why don't you just hire the artist you want me to draw like instead of hiring me? And I said, oh, that might be an idea. So he hooked me up with Fowler, and their relationship has been magical and wonderful ever since.
That's
with a lot of swearing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, when you were doing this story, like, you had to what? Then, like, okay, so you did original pitch for a series, and then you got this time warp thing. How do you come up with, like, a time period? Because I'm a big time travel fan. And it sounds like from your experiences with the Alan Moore stories and stuff like that you've grown up enjoying these type of stories as well.
Yeah.
So I love the time period you picked. I love that, like, I didn't realize who the character was until the end. And then I went back, when it hits you, like when there's the reveal of who she is. And I loved how you played this out, because we see, which is typical anytime you're doing a story where you've got, like, even the creepiest of people, if you see them in their childhood, a lot of times you don't realize that person's going to grow up to be who they are.
Yeah.
What made you choose, like, what was the genesis of that? Because that was cool.
Well, back in college, I went to school. I was a double major, but one of my majors was history. I was a modern European history major, so I studied a lot of 20th century European history, and I read, especially on World War I and sort of the intra-war period. I read like 1,000 books and took 1,000 classes on that, and I wrote my senior thesis on World War I. So I just did a ton of research. That sort of stuff is sort of buried in my head somewhere to be called up on when I need, which is never. So that was very useful 4 years of my life. But good that, 15 years on, I had the first chance to use that. And so that sort of period appealed to me easily and sort of came to me easily. Although there is a factual error in the book, but don't tell anyone. It's the mystery of the book. I'm not going to tell it all out.
Now we've got to go and look and dig up the factual error.
The League of Nations flag there's a flag for the League of Nations in there, and it is authentic. Although there never actually was a League of Nations flag. That was sort of something they came up with at the very end of the League of Nations that they kind of never officially adopted. So that's not if you're thinking that I know that's not entirely correct, that it's a League of Nations flag, but it was kind of a League of Nations flag. So that's not the error. The error is much more blatant and terrible than that.
Couldn't we just argue that the error was caused by the guy who came through time?
Yeah, no, I have a backup. I can argue with it. Yeah. I think the error. I think I could say, like, maybe this isn't the only time traveler, or that there was this and that and this and that. But I mean, it was an error that I should have caught myself.
I still say it was that guy because maybe he missed the first time.
Exactly. Maybe he hit a butterfly.
No.
Yeah. So that era, it sort of naturally appealed to me, I guess.
When they tell you about an anthology like this, Tom, how much information do they give you about, like, one of the things I really liked about this anthology and all the stories in it, I'm a huge anthology fan. One of the things I really liked about this one and all the stories in it is there seemed to be a lot of creative freedom to kind of do your own story and to stretch your kind of, creative end of things. But do they, when they put together an anthology like this, obviously the title, Time Warp and everything, do they give you kind of parameters they're looking for, or what does that kind of thing look like when it comes to an anthology? I'm not quite sure what that looks like.
They were very open with this. In fact, I was told the title was Time Warp, but I wasn't told to pitch a time story. If you'll notice, I think 2 of the few stories there have nothing to do with time. Basically, the Matt Kint story is not a time travel story, basically, and the one of the other ones is not a time travel story. I was told to pitch a science fiction story, just something sci-fi, something interesting, and because it was called Time Warp, I immediately went to the time stories, but that was not actually part of my guidance. Interesting enough, but they were wide open, and boy, I mean, I pitched a story where a little boy gets shot in the head in the first page, or the second page, and I mean, not to spoil anything that spoils it, but and an old lady hangs herself on the last page, and there was no hesitation from Vertigo. They were like, "Yeah, that sounds fucked up. That's us. So come on aboard." And I was actually, I mean, this is I don't know what kind of concern this is. It's not a silly concern, but it's a neurotic concern. I think the Newtown massacre actually occurred, and with I have little children who are just that age, and you have this whole thing about children being shot, and it was just off, horrible. And I was thinking, oh, Vertigo's going to blanch at the fact that I'm doing this story about a child getting shot. And again, they were very open to it, and they sort of saw that the bigger perspective, and this was when just random violence. This was violence in service of a story, in service of a theme, and they were very accepting of it. The only person who wasn't accepting was poor Tom Fowler, who was drawing a child getting shot in the head the day this was on the news, and again called me to swear at me.
That's the funny creatively. That's interesting because you have a story vision in your head, but then there's a partner that you're working with that you got to say, okay, I'm writing this stuff, and they've got to visually bring it to life. It's probably a lot like a screenwriter working with actors. As far as like hey, this is what I want you to do, and trying to get that vision to come to life.
It is really very odd, and I mean, I'm a novelist, so I come from that school of, like, I control every single visual I want to put inside your head. And to sort of turn that over to someone, it's an intimidating. Now, I've worked with Tom before, and I have the greater respect for him. And I like Tom enough to know that he will correct my mistakes. I know that I'll fuck up, and he'll pull me in. So I trust him enough to do that. I've never worked with someone so far where I don't have that trust. So that makes it a lot easier. But man, it is bizarre because and it's really stressful too, because you'll write something down and you'll send it out to an artist and you get the art pages back and you have no idea if it's going to be total shit or if it's going to be exactly what you want. I can't even look at the art. I know some writers are like, oh, I'm so excited to see it. I am not excited to see it. It makes me frightened. And I have to have my wife look at it first just to tell me it's not total crap. And then I kind of can glance at it and look at it. But yeah, it's a horrible process. And I write, I'm horrible. Artists don't like me. I write full scripts with angles and panel layouts, and then I have the artist tell me to go fuck myself. Is how I do my writing.
Is that because do you do that because you got to visualize it yourself and you want it to look a certain way, or how? It's because one thing I've loved as a comic fan. And just being a reader and an enjoyment, and I actually even a fan of novels. A lot of times you get an opportunity to see, the things behind the scenes, everything from notes to full scripts to everything. It's always interesting for me to see the diversity that everybody, even though there, you'll see some commonalities between writers, there's a unique style that has to do with the creative approach. So it's always interesting to kind of see that. Where do you think that comes from you?
I mean. To me, I mean, I live by the credo of a character is action, and you describe your action. You don't describe sort of what's in your character's minds. I try to put that through basically all of my writing, and doing that with a comic is it's not hard. The thing I say about comics is comics exist to eliminate the adverb. There's no need to have words, a description in them. The pictures are supposed to do that. That's what they're for. So when I'm writing a comic, what I want to do is sort of eliminate all narration. I want to eliminate extra words. I want to eliminate people talking about things they don't need to talk about to explain the story. All of that needs to be sort of shuffled out, taken out the door. What's supposed to be in there is supposed to be you're looking at a moment that would actually happen, not something where the writer is putting information in there to forward the story. And so that's why I write sort of full scripts like that, because I want to have the pictures and the beats exactly match the words in order to get that sort of precision right. So I don't have extra words in there sort of, hey, look, Spider-Man's jumping over a building because he needs to fight Doc Ock. It's rather, you see Spider-Man jumping off the building, and that comes naturally from the panel before, and you don't need that extra narration in there. So I write full scripts to lessen the words.
That's cool.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I want to talk about, because I want to jump into it. Actually, we'll do a spoiler warning at the beginning of the show about this particular story, and obviously the book we can do a little bit more of a tease. I want to talk a little bit about the characters in the book though, because I'm geeking out about them. So
yeah,
but
geek out, dude. That's what we're here for.
When I'm looking at the initial page, how do you find a voice when you're going historical? One of the things I like about time travel stories is you have the chance to play with real historical characters, but then kind of do your own spin, put in your own creations and all that. How do you find the voice for a character like Addie? And I love it. I'm like sitting here. I'm like, really? We've got an endearing name for him?
Well, the first thing I did was a little research, and this is such a news flash, but it's so easy to do research on all these things. But I do want to say that if you are looking to go to sleep at night, the thing you should not do before you go to sleep is do a ton of Hitler research. So I researched Hitler's family, and I read a lot of his sister, who's featured in the story, Paula, was interviewed a few times. She was interviewed by British and American intelligence after the war, and she was interviewed for a documentary about broadcast. And she talked briefly sort of about what her brother was like as a child, and she said they played cowboys and Indians, and she idealized him, and it turns out she sort of lied a little bit in her interviews and about how close they were and how much he protected her. So what I took from the initial scene, I imagine, is something she basically describes in those interviews. So that was so easy. She said we used to play cowboys and Indians out together in the field. So I was like, okay, that's an easy scene to write. And then writing him, you just want to write sort of a normal boy, but a little farther, a little more disturbed. I wanted to put sort of in the very beginning that concept of how he was raised in terms of thinking of the other and the outsiders as being evil and yucky and something. So I put a little line in there about him calling people dirty Indians instead of just normal Indians. So yeah, I wrote I wrote a little boy, but I wrote him a little disturbed.
I gotta say, I absolutely loved this story, by the way. This was a wonderful, I was like, you get into this opening with, this little boy and his little sister, and bam, he's dead. I'm like, what? And I got, you threw me, it was a great usage of starting it off in 1901, because that's a date. Him as a young kid, I don't think of him as a young kid. If this had been, in the 40s, if this had been in the 30s, even, I would have maybe thought, okay, I would have thought this was, who little Addie was. Well, as a kid, it didn't dawn on me until the end when we see, his sister. When they finally called the sister by her last name, I was just like, this is incredible, and I loved how you went through with a flow through on this, where this whole time you gave us the hints in the beginning, and it's just this build up to the end, the final climactic. I gotta say, this was a great usage of that.
Hey man, dude, thanks. I really appreciate it. Some of the credit here goes to Fowler. I should call that guy out, because how I originally had it, I hadn't have it a twist. It wasn't a twist for me. It was sort of, you were supposed to know from the beginning it was Hitler, and you were just following the sister story, and it was just sort of a sad story about a sad girl. And I wanted it just to be a new angle on an old idea. What if Hitler died and we were just watched from someone else's point of view? And it was Fowler who said, well, we have to do this as a twist. You have to not find out till the end that it's Hitler. And I said, well, that's going to be corny, to have it in the last line. Oh, and it was Hitler the whole time. But Fowler's like, no, if you do it well, if you do it subtly, it won't be corny, it'll be cool. It'll be like those wonderful episodes you remember. And he was totally right, and that's how I wrote it, and that's how we did it. So, credit Mr. Fowler where credit's due. It's the last time I remember saying.
That's one of the cool things about a collaborative process, though, is sometimes you just get a different idea. You hear about writers doing that all the time, when they'll do like a script read-through with somebody and they'll point out something that all of a sudden makes them rethink a direction they were going in, or maybe even a character in a story. And I think it definitely paid off here. I didn't know who it was. I'm going to admit, maybe there's people listening that are kind of like, what are you, an idiot? And yes, but... But I really liked not knowing. I liked at the end because I was really focused on the girl. And this is something that I will connect with A Once Crowded Sky that I'm really enjoying. I really like how you'll take emotional moments, whether they're, it's something traumatic like this or even life change, a life change or something, and they feel grounded in reality. Because that right away makes a connectability to a character. So she just witnessed her brother shot. And we see her there, like, clutching the photo, being yelled at by the dad because of the way that she's kind of reacting to it and the things she's saying about this demon, because she saw this thing come out of time. So, and it sends her on this lasting path of there are no demons, and she's trying to say, no, you don't understand. This isn't making this up. This orange-suited dude came out and did this thing. But that's one of the things I loved about the girl is all the way through is... we were sympathetic to the fact that because we saw it. We're sympathetic to what she saw. I love that I didn't know who the guy the brother was, because I think one of the keys about that was I wasn't judging her because of her family, which I think there's a danger of doing in this particular story. If you know, like, okay, this, the brother is this historical figure who's done that. It was kind of a cool thing to, like. It was funny when I reread the story, it reads on different levels depending on what you know. And there's a value to rereading this story to see it like the way you were originally talking about how you were envisioning it, you can do that the second time through. So it's actually funny how you can read it both the way that Tom suggested to you and then the way that you intended, depending on if you've done you have to do a reread of the story because it's very cool the way it rereads, where you're like, oh my gosh, that's his sister, and look at her. It does bring a reality to the fact that, and you see this said often, that everybody is somebody's family member, and there's they see that person in a way that we can't because we're looking at historical circumstance and facts and horrible things that they've done and what they were a part of. And we've got our own vision of that person right away, a preconceived notion because of the fact that we know, like, this is what this kid would have done or did do, actually. It was interesting to read the story one way the first time through and then go back through and do a reread, and it really works on a different layered level, which I think is tremendously neat. And it's one of the things that I think is one of my favorite things about time travel storylines, which is cool.
In my former career, it's kind of weird, but I spent my 20s in the CIA doing counterterrorism work overseas in the aughts, and so you can imagine what that was sort of like. Mm-hmm. And I believed in my cause righteously, and I still do believe we were saving the lives of my friends and family and Americans. But there were things I saw and I witnessed where people were hurt or injured that had nothing sort of to do with it. And even though I had no regrets about sort of what was going on and what actions were taken, you have to take those stories into account. You just can't dismiss them, So absorbing that over the years and sort of witnessing that time and again, everything you write, if you're writing about Hitler, if you're writing about Superman, if you're writing about Bloodshot, whatever you're writing about, you have to put yourself into it. You have to take your experiences and your emotions and pour those into it. So all that stuff hopefully just sort of comes from me seeing that and hearing those stories and sort of telling that from a different angle.
And this is true of your book and this story. One of the things that I really am liking about your writing as I'm getting to know you as a writer is I feel like these people are real, living, breathing. They aren't characters that are, in text or in artistic form. They're characters that are three-dimensional. They're growing for me. I'm starting to get to know and get into their heads. How do you, as a writer, get to know your characters?
It's it's a step process. You do first. You give someone a simple motivation. I'm stealing from Alan Moore a lot this conversation, but I'm going to steal from him again. Alan Moore said there were sort of 3 phases to comic book characterization, which I think this is one of the most intelligent things I've ever seen about character writing. If you read his Making Comics, which I recommend to any people who want to write comics, he said that the sort of the first level was the 1940s superheroes are just born and they fight. They exist, they fight. That's all they do. The second level is the Stan Lee heroes. They're born, they exist. Something happens to them. Their uncle is killed. They push someone in front of a car. There's one incident that motivates them. Like they have sort of one-to-one motivation. I solve crimes because somebody killed my parents. It's a one-to-one motivation. And then there's the third level of motivation, which is what actual people are, which is you have those two layers. You have that born, you have that thing in the past, and then you have just sort of the randomness and insanity of life that makes no sense. Like the thoughts that go through your head are not actually related to the thoughts that came before, and what you did yesterday is not exactly what you did today. And the exact motivations for things are incredibly hidden, and sometimes to you, and sometimes to the people you're talking to, and sometimes they're random. So you sort of you build on that level when building a character. You build that it's almost like the history of comics. First you do your Captain America, then you do your Spider-Man, and then you do your modern Astro City characters. You have to do those layers like that.
What is it like as a writer? Did you always intend to be a comic book writer, a novelist, a little bit of both? Because I know you interned at DC and Marvel. Did I read that right on your? I think it was on your Facebook page.
Yeah. I was a copy boy at Vertigo in the wonderful heyday of Vertigo when it was Warren Ellis's Transmet and Ennis's Preacher, Azzarello with just starting 100 Bullets. These are all things I photocopied. I did not contribute to them in any sort of way. I think I erased some lines maybe in pencil one time.
Yeah, but dude, you were there.
I know, I was there. Axel Alonso was the guest. Was like a normal editor there. He was a line editor at the time, and I was just sort of a fly on the wall. I pitched Axel my first story, which he laughed off and ignored him. I was 19. And then I worked at Marvel. I was Chris Claremont's assistant.
Oh, what was that like?
Dude, it was awesome. It was. To me, I'm like a classic super comic book fan. I started when I was 7 years old. I was a Marvel zombie, and then I discovered DC through the Legion of Superheroes, and the William Meister Loeb's Flash really got me in. And then I worshipped these they were my Beatles. They were the people I thought were the coolest. I didn't want to see movie stars. I grew up in Los Angeles. They didn't mean comic book creators were cool. And then I went into my first day at Marvel. Here's Chris Claremont. You're going to be working, in the same office with him, talking to him every day. I couldn't talk the first week. And it was it was in Bob Harris's final days, right before the collapse of everything, when we were sort of circling the drain, and Marvel Knights had just started and was obviously working on a different level than everything else. Yeah. And I remember I worked on Kevin Smith's. Chris Claremont's job then was something like creative director, and basically he was in charge of reading every single script that came in and sort of commenting on it while he was writing his Fantastic Four run was going on at that time. And so what he would do is the scripts would come in, and I would read them first, and I'd write down my comments on them, and then we sort of he'd bounce ideas about it, and he would go on long monologues about storytelling and what he had done here and how he believed about comics and the industry and this person and that person, and just we had these long rambling conversations. And if you talk to Claremont, he's got stuff to say on a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah.
And so it was like a clinic in storytelling, and I grew up on X. When I was little, X-Men comics were money. I don't know if you remember this era, but we used them as currency when I was in junior high. Like they were so rare. If you wanted to trade for other comics, you could get 6 comics for a Claremont X-Men comic, and you hoarded those together to trade off with your friends. You get 2 copies, and that was wonderful.
Dude, mine came in the paper wrapping. I did the subscription. There was a time my parents were divorced. And I lived with my mother on the week, it was Thursday through Sunday. And my mom got me she knew I was a comic fan. And my mom was really the one that was a supporter of hey, he's into comics and all that. She supported all my geek culture stuff. But when I discovered Claremont's X-Men, it was the Belasco issue where, with Ileana, where she came out and she was older, after all that.
Yeah, no, I know that with Colossus.
Yeah. And I went back and got, because it was... Fortunately, it was the comic shops were around then. I had been reading comics long before then, but that was the first experience with X-Men. I'm why have I not been reading this? So I went back and I got most of the run leading up to it, with Claremont, because I fell in love with this guy's writing. And, he's one of those guys, like, when you're saying, I was working with Claremont, I'm like drooling right now. I'm like, this guy was like having one-on-one conversation with this guy. He was like a god to me. That's an incredible experience. It has to be very influential to you as a writer to be able to sit down and talk to these people who had such a prolific effect on the comic book world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are things that Claremont ingrained in me that I think I can't lose almost. The idea that every comic is someone's first. I mean, and that's a cliche that everyone uses, but he believed in that, and he taught what he preached. He wanted you to pick up that comic no matter how far, and he got way into 17 subplots in each issue. He wanted every subplot to stand on its own, and so you could read that. And that's how I got into it. I mean, I came to X-Men in the middle of Inferno, which makes no sense if you read it even front to back. But I remember picking up an issue and being like, I know who these characters are. I know Madeline Pryor. Of course, she's the comeback dead clone ex-wife of the superhero who abandoned her with the demon baby, whose wife he's working with now. Perfectly. Let's go. Let's run. Deep water. So that I remember that got totally ingrained in me. I remember something that changed my about storytelling to this date when he talked about how he liked writing Star Trek. I said, why do you like writing Star Trek? He's like, because you don't have to have thought balloons for Kirk. I was like, what does that mean? He's like, well, Kirk, his brain is outside of his body. McCoy is his emotions. So if Kirk has an emotion, you put it in McCoy's mouth. And Spock is his logic.
Wow.
One is his superego and one is his id, and they talk around him. I mean, one is his ego and one is his id, and they talk around him, and he's the superego. And I had never thought of characters as being almost as manipulatable as I was like, no, these are separate things. But to him, it was all just like these characters need to work together to tell a story. And I was like, wow, I've never even thought about storytelling that way before. It really blew my mind.
But wait, it's been a while since like somebody's related something, because I've been a fan of comics and novels and writing and everything, my whole life. So it's been a while since I hear something where I'm kind of like, okay, you just blew my mind on Star Trek. Because it's so true.
I'm telling you.
That's fantastic. Because that's the truth about. I've never thought of it that way, but that's really the truth. That's a sign to me, though, of great writers is. I think what ends up happening is you take bits and pieces of so many people that you've interacted with, and you make. And then yourself. You put yourself into it as well and your own ideals. And that's when you're doing something fresh and new and you have a voice. Yeah. And it's a nice mishmash of all of these great things and life experiences and things. And it's really clear to me when I read your writing and I'm reading characters like in this story. I love the time passage with her. Because you're telling a short story because it's in an anthology title. So you've got to get a lot of story development in the sense that we want to make sure that we as the readers know this character and have an emotional attachment to her. And that happens really quickly. Like when you see her in 1917 and she's sitting here saying, maybe I should join the war, you get this feeling that this tragic experience that she witnessed has set her on this path, especially with the fact that she wasn't believed. That's one to see something so horrible, to be able to convey that story and have a chance of healing, and then to be almost smacked in the face with what you're saying is not true, and you need to put that out of your head and deny it. But yet there's that part of you that's screaming out on the inside that, no, this is what happened. This is true. That was the amazing part of this story to me, because I kept going through this emotional roller coaster with her and really identifying with the tragedy of what she witnessed and what it would do to her being a part of it. Because a lot of times when you talk about tragedy, you talk about the people that are the victims that witness it and are there and they're a part of it, and how it really changes them on a deep, deep level. In this case, we see a girl who never is given an opportunity to heal, because every time she hits the point that she's like, this happened to me, and she's screaming out that, I really need support here. I need to tell this story and just have one person believe it. Just one. Or at least entertained on some level that maybe what I'm saying is true. She never gets that. And I was sitting here rooting for her. And it's funny how I think that was the great part of not knowing who she was I was totally looking at her as this blank slate. And the second time through when you read it, you still carry that with you. but then you're like, I'm trying so hard to love you as much as I did. And I like that. I really liked that layer of the story to me, because there's something really cool about that, which is, and I'm like sitting here even questioning myself, where I'm like, but I'm being unfair to this girl because that's not her fault. And I'm like, I like that, like, it worked on me on such a deep level that way. This is something I like about anthologies, is that you get a unique story that, you know, would this work as a series? Well, you can't, you know, it'd be hard for comic companies nowadays. I think there was a time where you could do stuff like that. But the great thing about anthologies is you get this chance for a creator to kind of go, you know, this is something I could probably pitch as a novel and make it work. In novels, you have a lot more of an open landscape as far as different types of stories you can present. But in a comic, an anthology is really the place to do something crazy like this, where it works on a lot of deep levels. And I love her to death. Just a great character when she's being carried away. And you see, like, nobody, like, seems to have sympathy for her when they're going through. It's more like they're clutching their head like, you know, where did I go wrong? How did I not support her to make her see that she's delusional? Yeah. Which is so totally not the case, and it's great.
I think that the hardest thing in writing, I don't know if most people agree with this, is to write without guidance, without restraint. When you're put under pressures to say, like, here's a limit you have to do, here's a box you have to stay in, it's so much easier to be creative because you can kind of bounce off the walls rather than there's nothing to sort of reflect you. If you're out in the open, you just write what you want for as long as you want. It's very hard. I think that's what I love about anthology. If you give a writer 8 pages, I mean, they have to. That is a complicated hoop they have to jump through. I mean, it's kind of like a circus trick they have to do, and so that's what I like about it. It's like this is an honest challenge to tell a good story in 8 pages. I mean, I've read graphic novels that haven't had stories in them, and I've read 3-page stories that blew my mind. So I think putting that restraint on writers brings out the best in them. It's sort of like it's making them do magic. And as far as relating to the character goes. I mean, to me, going back in time and shooting Hitler is like a no-brainer. It's like, go do it. Yeah, obviously, that shouldn't have happened. That was horrible. But obviously, it would have consequences. So I wanted to write a story that was about doing the right thing and having the wrong thing happen. It's not an original idea, but I think it creates an interest. I mean, that's what tragedy is. It creates that interesting tension of, like, you're going to watch this woman suffer, and she has to suffer, and it's going to be horrible. But you would do the same thing. You would make her suffer in this horrible way. It sort of involves the audience in that suffering.
Well, this pulled me in because of the changes you made to history, and I loved how we have this unified Europe, where we don't have the Nazi regime and we don't have Germany trying to take over the world. They're part of Europe. They're part of the United, the League of Nations, and just everyone rallies together with the Russians, and just there's more of this world peace just from the death of this one little boy who, would have grown up to be this terrible monster. And I loved seeing the tweaks in history, and that was something I appreciated better on the second and third read through, because you knew what to look. I knew to look for. Okay, because Hitler wasn't around, what changes happen? And that was something that I really got out of like second and third read throughs, were just the little adjustments and modifications to history that you made through this. You didn't make it too extreme crazy, but everything was very believable, very plausible on how this would have flowed through.
Yeah, I mean, the original pitch was so simple. It was paradise in the background, hell in the foreground. It was you're going to see someone suffer. I mean, because comics are that way. Like, you can tell 2 different stories at the same time because 2 different things are going on. You have those pictures and you have those words, so you can do that dichotomy. So it was so easy. It was such an easy idea to be like, okay, well, I'm going to tell one story in the pictures and another story with the words. I'm going to tell a tragic story with this one character, and everything in the background is going to point to a utopia, and again, create tension through that.
One of the things, we're unfortunately living in a time where there's been a lot of tragedy recently.
Yeah, tell me about it.
one of the things I've noticed, and I don't know if it's something with me maturing or if just maybe I'm noticing a different side of it than I noticed before. You know, you always focus on the victims and your heart goes out to the victims. It's funny how as I'm getting older and I don't know what's doing this, and I'm glad, I feel it's glad though, because I feel it's something where, you know, I think my heart's expanding and I'm being a little more realistic. I'm realizing that the family members of the perpetrator a lot of times are victims as well on a deep level. They didn't see it coming. You know, sisters and brothers and parents and, you know, even grandmas and aunts and uncles, you know, who maybe didn't see what was going on with this person, and that happens. I'm not taking anything away from the families of the actual victims. I don't mean it that way. Just to me, it's, if anything, it makes me angrier at the perpetrator because it increases the scope and scale of what they've done. Because now I'm looking at another level of victim that has been faced in this case. And it was funny, like this character in this story was another example of one where I'm like, wow, this is this person that I never think of Hitler as having a family. Other than his wife, because she's so historically prevalent that like she's somebody that I tend to think of. But I don't think of him having like parents and a sister and an expandable family. When I was reading this story, it was funny reading about her without recognizing who she really was. It kind of opened my mind to like, wow, even somebody like him had a family, and there were people that, you know, how did any of them feel about this? And, you know, was there ever, you know, future family members that like have to look back and kind of go, whoa, you know, like, you know, this guy, he did all these horrid things. And how do you live and they become victims in their own way? Or there are people that you sit there and go, how do you not recognize you should detest this? But I liked that aspect of the story, that I was thinking through my head like, okay, so what was she like in reality? And to me, one of the great things about science fiction, you know, about this type of story, is that it takes somebody like me who most of my experience with Hitler has obviously been limited to what he did when he was in power.
Yeah.
I'm now greatly interested in just trying to find out a little bit more about what was his life like outside of all that. Who were the people that were affected by his actions that were close to him? And I find that to be something. Comics are really capable a lot of times of introducing historical characters in a way that make you seek out the reality of them and more biographies and things. It's funny how many biographies I've read based on comics, you know, based on some character that was introduced in a comic because a writer had a great idea for a cool story featuring that character, even for a guest appearance or something. And it just led me down a path. And this is one of those where I'm like, I want to know more after this one about her and what her life was like.
Yeah, comics do biography very well. It's almost under the Frank Gehry stuff that he does with true crime.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, comic documentaries are absolutely wonderful. But yeah, Hitler's family, they're very odd if you do the sort of the basic research. Norman Mailer wrote his last book was on Hitler's family, and he had done the research, and his conclusion was Hitler was just born in sin, and the devil was there at the beginning. Well, he sort of threw up his hair because his father was the illegitimate son who made him legitimate, and his father may or may not have married his own niece, who was Hitler's mother. You know, his father was married before. It's why Hitler has an older stepsister who appears in the story, or an older half sister who appears in the story. And so he had sort of that weird, fucked up, semi-incestual coming from nowhere, and his father had to pretend to be somebody else. So, I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, you don't make a horrible monster overnight. It takes some work. So, but yeah. I see what you're saying. How comics can bring all that stuff out, and I would like to say it was not fun to do this research, but it was very interesting.
Well, you think about it, he can be, and even just any of the criminal, more evil type of people in history are fascinating to research on. It's one of the things I've done in my life is I have researched hate, and part of it I've done for my job, part of it I've done just because evil does fascinate me. Just how can somebody think this way? How could somebody possibly think, yeah, this is okay, this is normal, this is right? And when you start researching that, when you start thinking that, you gotta, at times you gotta watch it. Okay, I gotta stop reading this. I gotta put this down. I have to never ever go back to that, Vertigo, that website again, just because you're like, I've seen things I can't unsee, and I don't want a reminder of it.
Oh yeah, man! I had to put together a sheet for Tom of like all the faces of Hitler's family, and just going through the web and finding those. I couldn't sleep for a week. It was horrible. Yeah, but yeah, it is weird. It's I don't know what it is about our psychology that we sort of seek out. I mean, even my daughter, who's 3 years old, she wants to know about all the villains in the Disney movies, and the heroes don't interest her at all. She's yeah, okay, they're heroes, they go on, they're princesses, they do anything. But what's this Ursula? Why is she doing that? They want to know the motivations behind it. There's something about villains that you want to know the motivations. You want to get inside their head because they're made to be unrelatable, and because of that, because sort of natural human compassion, you have to fight against that, and you want to sort of relate to them, and it's weird.
We want to understand what our opposites. If you're a good and honest person, you understand the motivation for the good and honest people because you're like, hey, that's me. I think that way. But you look at these, like the villains, and you're like, why would somebody want to do that? And that's where you start to get your curiosity going. And that's one of the, it's kind of a slippery slope where you start going, okay, how far do you go into it? Do you start sympathizing with the villains? And then do you feel bad for them?
Well, fortunately with Hitler, it's sort of easy to avoid sympathy.
It's very easy on him. You kind of wish something like this would happen with his death, and when I was in college, I don't remember how we got started on this, but we started talking about like time travel and just that, and one of the topics that came up was going back in time and killing someone like Hitler. And I'm hanging out with a lot of military people, and they're all throwing out the military end of it where, well, if you went back and you killed Hitler, then this general would take command, and he in this battle, and they knew like the tacticians behind, the different battles, and like, well, if Hitler wasn't in charge, then these generals would be leading, and, the Nazis may have won. So it's good that, this monster was in charge because he was crazy. He was one of the big downfalls for the Third Reich was the fact that this nut job is in charge of it. And you start looking at just the different paths of it. And it's, again, it gets going, when you start thinking time travel stuff, you start thinking these it can go off on a tangent, and you're like, wow, I didn't even see that coming. Yeah,
that's what's cool about time travel is you can sort of do all the what ifs of history and all that stuff. But I could be wrong. I mean, I went to I taught a lot of social history, which is sort of against the great man theory of history. History is social movements. It's not about individuals. Who cares about Napoleon? It was about his armies, kind of thing. But I have trouble with that. I think there is something unique about Hitler and Stalin. Something that those individuals in the right place with their particular history, their particular parents and biography, did actually make a difference. They did move the world in a certain way, and they definitely moved the world in a wrong way. I mean, Hitler won with some 30% of the vote before he abolished it. I mean, all he would have needed was just such a small, less percentage to have not gotten elected in 33 or something. I know way too much about Hitler. Jesus Christ. But to me, he does stand out as a figure of history that moved it, and a figure that I think we would be better off if we removed him. I mean, and I don't think it. I'm pretty sure.
It's funny how much comic book and pop culture fiction. I mean, if you go to television shows and science fiction, and then you look at comics like the history of the Justice Society of America and Invaders and stuff like that, how much of that is focused on defeating Hitler? And how I mean, it really is. I mean, like he's a historical figure where really, I think the argument that we're all presenting here, as far as would it be worthwhile to go back through history and do this, and the validity of that is, I think, voiced by how much fiction has been driven by that concept of. I'm not talking about like even going back through time and shooting them like that. I'm talking about even where you're like, okay, we're going to rewrite history where there were superheroes. And they were, this guy was bad enough that they were supposed to be worldwide superheroes, but they were fighting with America, and and they were doing that. And I really liked that fiction. I liked the idea of Captain America being this soldier from World War II. And that he came to present day. I like that as being a part of the character's mythos and his history, because I think there's something to that. It makes history kind of come alive more, and it makes you interested in seeking out and following those characters, seeing what the hero motivation is. I really appreciate, too, when writers will do the background research and when you actually read real biographies or you see documentaries, you go back and go, wow, they were pretty darn accurate with what they were pulling in. For some reason, it increases my respect level. I think science fiction as a genre, and I think this is true in film and just kind of across the board, is often underestimated in the quality of literature it produces. And I think it's dismissed a lot of times when you look at drama and different things like that. And I think it's really, you've got some cutting edge talent that are really delivering stories that even that have a historical relevance and impact when you look at them, where your eyes can be open to things and challenged on things that actually happened by the way that writers are able to produce commentary through science fiction. I think it's just great.
No, I mean, obviously, I totally in agreement with that. I mean, genre writers are dismissed too often, but I think the world is changing now. People take George R. R. Martin more seriously than they would have 10 years ago, and I mean, genre is such a big deal in TV. It seems like that the tide has turned finally. That some respect is, because I mean, literature can't buttonhole itself into just like, literature is family drama. It's about two people getting divorced and what happens to them over 30 years. I mean, that book keeps getting written over and over again. Literature has to be bigger than that. It has to deal with these huge issues, and it's the huge issues that science fiction and fantasy have been dealing with for the last 50 years. So I think finally we're sort of turning we have sort of the Harry Potter generation coming up and saying, fuck that, we weren't raised on Gatsby, we were raised on Hogwarts, and we can recognize that literature comes from different places.
And I want to see the awards acknowledge that. I actually agree with you. A lot of what you're saying is very true. There has been a shift. And I think we're seeing that by the types of television, the high-quality television that's being produced right now, because Game of Thrones is awesome. But, when you're seeing that kind of stuff being put out there with the high quality, I think it is because, you're right, that generation now is starting to be the creative voices that are out there, and they're putting that quality in our face in a way that's incredibly satisfying. So I'm just hoping, like, when we see award shows and things like that now, that we're starting to see more and more acknowledgement of just how important that literature is.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, literature with Robinson Crusoe, it's an adventure tale about an island and savages. I mean, that's where it started in a genre.
Yeah,
it didn't start with a family story. So, and I mean, go back and read the Bible. I mean, the Bible's wonderful, but it true or not true, it's a wonderful fantasy. It's about war. It's about conflict. It's about huge themes clashing together, and it's also about small family themes at the same time. It's always been that. It's just we're coming back to it finally.
Absolutely. I felt so bad for her in 1944. She's sitting there and she's trying to do her part. I don't know what for her to be motivated to still try to fit into society on some level after everything she's gone through. This version of her amazes me. She's sitting there at the table and basically being told, everything looks great on paper, but there's this fact that you were being shocked that we kind of think that maybe you're not the right person for this job, and she leaves dejected again. I don't know who's paying more for his crimes, her or him, when he got shot, because he was done pretty quickly. It seems like she's the one paying for everything.
If you're very morbid, go on YouTube. You put Paula Hitler in it and watch they have a clip from a British documentary where they just show her walking around the streets, 5 years after the war, and just how defeated she looks, because she's just this frumpy old German woman who looks just like everybody else. But in her head she's like, I'm Hitler's sister, and I have to live with that. That is on me. I grew up with him. No matter how I live my life, that has to be part of me now. I mean, what an interesting tragedy.
And how do you develop a friendship from that with anybody? Because what's going to, even if you change your name, there's going to be that constant sense of either that person will actually discover who you are, or there's that part of you that's constantly going to be worried that they do. And you're never going to 110% believe that they aren't, because how could they not be, with what Hitler did, that they're not going to be judging you on some level based on the horrid things that he was a part of. Her life would be one that, that has had an impact, a trickle-down impact, that will affect her forever. Because you're sitting at a dinner, you're at a table and you're having a great conversation, and you find out, hey, we're sitting by Paula Hitler. The whole mood is going to change in the room. And you can't help but have that happen with the horrible atrocities associated. So that was something that I really enjoyed about this story, too, was just kind of seeing how, it's... I guess the universe has a way of repeating itself and setting itself on the right path, I guess, even when that event happened with him, where she's kind of living the life she would have led if he lived in this same sequence.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this. Anyone can fact check this on Wikipedia in 10 seconds, but there's famously, I think it's the half-sister's son went to America and actually enlisted in the army, Hitler's nephew. And then he had children, and they're alive, and they live in Long Island, and they live some this hermitish life, and they've all taken a vow of celibacy. That I think there's 3 of them, and they just live with that knowledge that I'm related to Hitler, that blood is in me, and I'm not going to pass it on. I found that just incredibly fat. And then it's in New York. It's like I could take a train and go visit them. How bizarre! And your great uncle is Hitler. But that has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your raising or anything. It's just in your blood. I mean, it's weird how humans work.
But even for them to sit there and to feel so strongly about it, that they're like, and I get it. I get where they're coming from. I mean, could you imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that? How would that affect you? To take that route though and go, and I get it. I want to be the end of the bloodline. I don't want to continue it, because how could I pass that on? Not even saying that yourself worrying about the outside people. How could I pass that on to a child? I get that side of it and that thinking. What a horrible place for somebody to be in, because they are, like you said, they're not, they're just, it's guilt by family history. They weren't the ones that did it, but yet, there's a part of them where they're recognizing that, like, this is something that was a choice of somebody in our bloodline, and how do you let that continue?
That's crazy. What
a powerful, crazy thing.
Yeah. And that's how you come up with an 8-page story idea for an anthology. To me, those are the stories that interest me. Those stories of forces acting on people that are out of their control and how they handle it. I keep going back to that well. That and Gods and Guns were like my themes.
Her story ends very similar to, the whole Eva Braun Hitler thing, where, you see her at the end, she's kind of isolated and alone. They're banging in, they're saying, and basically saying, you must pay. and I'm like sitting there like, again, there's a crazy karma thing that's coming through. One of the things I really enjoyed about that sequence, though, and this goes back to the beginning, I didn't realize that the gibberish that was coming out of the, quote unquote demon's mouth as he was coming through was English. This is a language that you can actually follow until you're looking at the television set and you're seeing the television the way she's hearing it. I really loved that moment, because it wasn't just the reveal that she was Miss Hitler. It was also the reveal of, oh my gosh, that's what was going on in the beginning. I don't know if other people listening to this caught onto it before then. I didn't catch onto it until this sequence. That, for me, is when I hit it. And I loved that. That was another where I'm like, oh, dummy. That was great.
Yeah, let's put some, again, credit where credit's due. That actually came from a note from my editor. One of the few notes. Mark Doyle's my editor of Vertigo, and he's awesome. I sing his praises. He had asked me in the original script, just this small, he's like, because I had basically gobbledygook for the original. He's like, what is the what's the time traveler saying? And I said, oh, what a fantastic question. What is he saying? What would a time traveler who came and was confronted with a little girl yelling at him, "Who are you?" when he just killed the little girl's brother? What would that guy say? And just from that thought grew the fact that I wish I could somehow put it in there that people could read it. And so then I decided, and then it came out that I wrote it in this weird sort of phonetic way, and then I put sort of the key to how to read the phonetics in the final page, so people could go back and read what he would say. And again, it has to do with comics, where you can tell 2 stories at once. You can tell a background story and a foreground story.
I mean, after I saw that, I immediately went back through it, and I'm trying to figure it out, what he actually says. It's driving me nuts, because I'm like, it's just phonetic English, Jim. You should be able to do this. You're not that dumb. I think I know what he says, but I'm not 100% certain, and it's been driving me nuts.
Well, I can't say it because I would sound stupid doing it. But if you read it out loud in a slightly Swedish accent, you'll get through it.
Because I'm reading it as "This is justice for my family."
It's close. It's close.
That's how I took it too. I'm not gonna lie, that's how I took it too. But there's that. You know what's throwing me off? It's the G is throwing me off there. That's where I'm like, that doesn't. I'm leaving the G out, so I'm missing something there. I love this.
Yeah. It's it's nice to give people if they want to take some time. The poor people had to pay $8 for this anthology, so let them take some time with it. That's a lot of money to spend. I mean, that's a whole movie. That's 2 hours of movie time you could be watching. So, giving a little something to do and a little puzzles in the book gives you a little more entertainment for your dollar.
It's a meaty anthology.
Yeah, it really was. There's a lot of good stories in it. Yeah.
I mean, it's 76 pages. I mean, that's a big book. And I like that they did that. I don't know what the sales number... I don't really... Being honest, I'm a reader. I enjoy... I was into this because it was... I had pre-ordered this prior to knowing we were going to have the opportunity to talk to you. I'm a big fan of anthologies. And I'm a big fan of the writer Gail Simone, too. When I heard that she was doing her first Vertigo story, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And then... Daryl had mentioned that you were doing a story in here. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. This is a great opportunity to read Tom's work for the first time and all that. So it was kind of a win-win on so many levels. When I realized I'm reading a 76-page 76-page book, I'm a fan of anthologies for that. That's a lot of content that you're getting for that $8. When you figure all of the writers and artists that were involved in putting this together, you're getting a lot of really rich and diverse content in there. And big thing about anthologies is if you hit a story where you're kind of like, I'm just not connecting with this one, well, you got another story like right there, right afterwards. So there's so much content that I can't imagine you not finding something of satisfaction to make it worth the purchase with what you got depth-wise with this book. I hope it did well, because I know anthologies are one of those things where traditionally comic fans either tend to really give them a shot or tend to bypass them because it's an anthology. And to me, they're one of my favorite parts of comics, is anthologies, because of the fact that, what you alluded to before, it's a chance for creators to really go crazy places and stretch the creative muscles. This was incredibly satisfying, especially with the sheer amount of content.
Dude, I was pissed when I read it, to be perfectly honest, because it was much better than I expected it to be. And I was like, crap. I was like, is my story going to stand out? These stories are fantastic. Like, Lemire Lindorf's story, coming right off of it. At first I was like, oh, this is kind of, normal. And then by the time at the end, I was like, my mind is blown. This is awesome. I want to read it again. And I read it again. Yeah, I was pissed at how good it was, frankly. I wish people had done a worse job so I could stand out like a star. But yeah, there was just awesome talent working.
You got to look at it
awesomely.
You got to look.
Writer.
Yeah, you got to look at all that a different way, though, because I think if people pick this up and give it a shot, there's a chance that, and I'm hoping more of the fan. It's one of the reasons why we do the show that we do. I'm hoping more of the fan community that really enjoyed this, and anybody who didn't try this, I can't recommend this anthology enough. I'm hoping more of the fan community shouts this type of thing out. Because in order for more of them to be produced, you've really got to go out and buy it and give it a shot and get some sales numbers on this thing. So that way they'll do more experiments like this. Because I love the experimental nature of comics. I love when people get to try new things and we get to see this kind of crazy creativity. And when you're a part of, this is the cool thing, Tom, and you can say this. Look, your story, which is amazing, is a part of this amazing collection of just really gifted creators who have done, really killer stories.
I know. They really did a fantastic job. Yeah, I'm totally proud of this book. I go to cons and sell it at my table, and it sells out in about an hour. As soon as people see it and hear what it's about, they want to buy it. So I just hope people hear about it.
Yeah, I think it's great. Can we talk a little bit about A Once Crowded Sky?
I wrote that too.
Yeah. This was one, I got to admit, I started reading it after the Time Warp story. And I usually do, as I mentioned in our conversation that we were having before we started recording, I usually save novels for the summer. When I heard you were going to be on the show, I'm like, I'd like to at least page through the book to get kind of familiar for layout and how it looks and all that stuff. Well, paging through the book quickly turned into, let me start reading this thing. I knew you had associated with Tom Fowler for it. I didn't realize how you were going to incorporate some graphic novel style pages into the prose novel. But then also, instead of chapters, you have issues, and the story's divided into parts. And I really loved the introduction that way, because we were dropped into what was like traditional superhero action, as we were seeing a lot of, the characters kind of reminiscing about their backstory and all that. But there's this reality, and this is really the opening premise of the book. These are heroes who, because of this event, this Blue, and the fact that they're ultimate, really gave up his life for, to save everything. They all gave up their powers to save everything. We're now in a world where these are former heroes and former villains, former superpowered characters, where they now have to adjust back to normal life. We all dream of being heroes. We all dream of having... I dream of being able to fly and being invulnerable, that stuff. What comic fan doesn't? Because you dream about the life changes you would go through if you got those things. Now all of a sudden you would be this person and you would do that. But what happens when all of that is taken away and you've got to adjust back to the life that you had before, or the life that people would assume you would have? And how does that change those relationships? And that was something I found so gripping and engaging. Is it okay if I'm allowed to say a little bit about Penultimate here?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, because what happens when the sidekick plays a little bit of coward and he's still got his juice.
Nice.
I've been eating this book up. This has been my nightly read. Right before I go to bed at night, I pull out I've got a Kindle, and I've been pulling out and I've been paging through it. I've been really digging this world. Tell us a little bit about A Once Crowded Sky, and where did this come from? Like, how long have you been working on this? Because this is a novel. This is a big undertaking.
Yeah, it's not my. I had written a practice novel before this, which is crap and wore me on my computer forever. But this is my first novel, published through Simon and Schuster, and like everything I write, it comes from a personal place. So I wrote it. For people who don't know, it's about a bunch of superheroes who lose their power. So a bunch of guys that used to be something, now they're nothing, and a threat comes and they have to fight it. And like you said, they had to. How they lost their powers was they put all of like a crisis-like threat comes called the Blue, and they put all their powers into one superhero, the Superman of their world, Ultimate, who's a robot, and he has to fight the crisis, and he dies doing it, so he loses all their powers. Except one person doesn't show up to the sacrifice. One person doesn't give up his powers, and he's Ultimate's partner, Penultimate, which means second to Ultimate. So the one guy who has power still is the coward who didn't show up. Where it comes from is it comes a lot from. I was in the CIA. I joined after 9/11. I did counterterrorism work in the Middle East and South Asia. I did a little work here in the States, and then I left that life. I had kids, and so we couldn't do it again. And I couldn't sort of be the operations officer I wanted to be while being the father I wanted to be. That sort of tension of living a life of violence, choosing to leave a life of violence, how much you kind of want to go back to it, how powerful you felt. I mean, I used to carry a gun and do something that at least I consider to be trying to save the world. And then I left that, and I was changing diapers, and I wanted to write sort of about that tension, and I write whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's better to sort of throw yourself into what you're most talented with, where you can help the most people, or whether it's better to throw yourself into your family and do the best you can for your kids and your wife or husband. And so I wanted to write that, and I couldn't write about my CIA experience for obvious reasons, so I wrote about it through superheroes. And A Once Crowded Sky is sort of the novel that came out. And it's about that tension. It's about that tension that I think most people feel that when we're kids, we all want to be astronauts. We all want to be superheroes. We all want to fly. We all have these huge, wonderful dreams. And then when we grow up, we have responsibilities. And because of those responsibilities, because we're doing the exact right thing that we're supposed to be doing for our family and for our lives, we have to give up on these dreams, these essential things. And that's not always a bad thing. In fact, that sometimes can be a fulfilling thing. And it sometimes can be a bad thing. It affects different people in different ways. And that's what Once Crowded Sky is about. That and a lot of awesome action scenes, because I love comics. So
Now, when you were building this, did you create the heroes in your mindset? Maybe even like create sub stories that we'll never actually get to see on these guys, just so you have a better understanding of who these heroes were?
Yeah, absolutely. Each of the heroes has a backstory, and every hero, I tried to make them sort of representative of different eras of comic books. I'm as you guys are. I'm big into comics history and comics culture, and I wanted this to be about this novel to be about that, and to introduce that theme of why comics are powerful and how comics affect life. So I purposely took them as archetypes of different comic eras. So there's a hero there that represents the Silver Age, and there's a hero there that represents sort of a Neil Gaiman hero. There's a hero there that represents sort of a Grant Morrison postmodern character. So each character I try to sort of make. There's a hero there that's a Rob Liefeld kind of Wolverine-ish character. I try to take them from one era of history and mix them together, so sort of all the history of comics was represented in the book.
Were there characters that changed along the way? Like you had one vision for them at the beginning, and then as you got to know the character, you're like, oh, this is really kind of who they are. Did that happen with any of them, where you're just kind of, whoa, like they're not at all what I was thinking in the beginning, because they've kind of, you hear all the time about when somebody writes a character, they kind of come to life and kind of take off on their own. Did that happen to you with any of the characters?
Yes, it happens with the soldier. So the two main characters, penultimate, the guy who doesn't show up, and the other main character is a character called the Soldier of Freedom, who's sort of drawn from that Captain America, patriotic hero, and he's a guy who's who he basically represents America. He's fought in every single American war, and his grandfather was George Washington. He was raised by Abe Lincoln, kind of those things, and that character sort of started off completely like a two-dimensional character, like I was saying before, where he was just a grumpy guy. And I was just amazed as I went farther along how much a character who had embraced war and who killed and liked killing and enjoyed killing, how sympathetic they would be with a sort of a peaceful movement, and how much someone who had worked so hard and had gone so tough and so rough would want at the end of the day to rest. And the more I wrote him, the more I sort of felt that character being like, I'm tired of the noise, I want the quiet. And it was a surprise to me, and it was good. I was like, oh, I like where this character's going.
Is it hard to create unique characters? Because one of the things I really appreciate about this, and it's something in comics I'm always amazed by, when you think about how many superheroes have been developed since way back in Action Comics, and just how many different takes and different styles and all that, you figure there's just such a diverse lineup of things that have already been done. Is it hard to create unique and interesting characters? I loved that about this book, that I could totally get what you were going for as far as like pulling with different eras and stuff like that, and I felt that. But I also felt like that the characters were unique and interesting, and like, well, you mentioned, he felt very flat first, he felt very two-dimensional to you. But the character that comes across on the page is the one that, wound up in the final story is not at all that. There's so much to him that he feels very different. I never was thinking to myself, this is Captain America. That is totally a compliment. I was totally thinking to myself, like, wow, I'm into Soldier of Fortune and all that. Right, even from, like, because you a lot of times will see him from the perspective of the other characters and their interactions, even a female character, and I love that aspect of the book, that these characters feel alive, because you don't get just to know them from themselves, but from, like, everybody that they've interacted with. And there's something about that makes it feel real world, too, because we do that in real life when we meet up with and interact with others. And that was something that I really appreciated about the story, was the fact that you didn't just use the main characters. There was a lot of supporting cast that were used to really flesh out the story and make this feel like a living, breathing, vibrant world.
To me, I've said this before, comics and sort of that essential, the cast of comic characters, to me it's like jazz. Like the perfect jazz riffs were written a long time ago. I mean, they're the Tin Pan Alley riffs. And I think the perfect archetype characters were written. I mean, nobody's going to write a character better than a character getting powers better than Stan Lee's initial run on Spider-Man. It's done. And nobody's going to write a better patriotic character than Simon and Kirby back in the 40s. No, you can't create a character that good. I mean, but he wasn't the first. I mean, Captain America was a rip-off of someone else. I think he was a rip-off of S.H.I.E.L.D., but he was a rip-off of a patriotic character who came like 6 months before him. So your job as a creator, I think it is to take those lines, take those brilliant, and like brilliant jazz musicians do an improv on them and create tension by pulling away from what's expected. When someone sees a Captain America character, they go in with a certain expectation. And if they just see Captain America, it's so boring because they've heard that song 1,000 times. So you want them to think it's Captain America, and then you pull away from that Captain America, and that tension, that makes it interesting. And then when you come back to the Captain America aspects of it, that release, it feels good as a reader. And then you pull away and you create tension, and you come back and you create relief. And using genre that way, I think is brilliant. The hardest part is people who sort of think that sense those characters, that once you have Captain America, you can never have a patriotic character. That once you have Robin, you can never have a sidekick. Once you have a cowboy, doesn't mean you can't have John Ford. Once you have John Ford, doesn't mean you can't have spaghetti westerns. I mean, that's what genre is. We build upon our forebears. We build upon sort of these tropes.
And I think that's something that in comics in particular, I think that's what keeps them moving forward. It's why it's still around and why we as fans years later are still relating to them, is because there's always people adding new things, whether they're creating unique and new characters or they're doing their take on a classic character. You get that. I liked the twist in this story, and I know characters have been depowered before in comics. I've enjoyed reading their stories and seeing what happens. For me, this felt very different and fresh because everybody was. There was this event, and it was so focused on not their quest to gain back their powers. It was focused on how everybody's dealing with that was different. And what that looked like for each person was unique and different to them. And I guess that felt so much more like reality to me. You talked back about Stan Lee's Spider-Man. One of the things that I think works so well about his Spider-Man, and why every time you read interviews or hear documentaries where people will mention what it was like when they first read that back when it was first created, what was so different about it was the fact that Stan Lee crafted a character where Peter Parker was more important than, the mask and everything, and we got to know a real character. In this case, I loved that I got as a reader an establishment that these guys were heroes, and we get to see them reminisce about that. But then you get to see just how much your life changes when you drop down from that. And just like you were like this person in the sky in the clouds traveling with all these heroes, and your main focus was saving everybody and fixing everything and doing all these things, and you had that camaraderie and the purpose, that sense of purpose, and the sense of reward that comes from accomplishing that purpose, and even having the reward of having a foe, and that foe being a driving force that, sometimes the reoccurrence of a foe was something that added a continuity to your own life. But when that's gone, how that drastically changes you and forces you to reevaluate. You hear people all the time, they have to, if they lose a job, if, there's some kind of, big life change, they have to reevaluate who they are and where do they go from here. Can they do something similar? Do they need to reinvent themselves? And that's the one thing I really loved about this story, because it's a geeky, cool comic universe, but then it's dealing with these deep, rich, at a time where I think this is very timely, real world problems that people are going through on a daily basis today, here and now. And that's something that I really appreciated about the book.
Yeah, I love comics, and I sort of grew up in the fantasy of them, and I was sort of always picturing myself in them. I think maybe it's not unique to comics, but to me, comics hit me in that spot harder than any other medium, where it's like when you read them, especially when you're a kid, obviously especially when you're a kid, but you participate in them. I used to put down comics, and the first thing I used to do when I was a kid was take a swing at a bad guy in the middle of the air who was standing in front of me. And I swear, when I was 10 years old, I could feel my fist hitting that guy. And I remember walking past buildings, and I would push on them, and in my imagination, that building was falling down. And that feeling never sort of left me, even though it's obviously ridiculous, and you realize it's ridiculous. And especially when I joined the CIA, and suddenly I'm in a world which is like a superhero world. There are secret identities and secret missions and things that you can't imagine that people can do now. And then at first you're like, wow, this is amazing. This is like nothing else. This is the fantasy. But then there's a reality to it, and dealing with that reality and dealing with the actual what it is. At first, it's heartbreaking, but there's something. Accepting the consequences and accepting the reality of your life is not always the worst thing. Living outside of the fantasy can actually be more rewarding and less crazy. You can go back to we can link the discussions and go right back to Hitler. Here's a guy who never left his fantasy world, right? He saw his father ingrained in him this weird utopian vision of Germany, and he never left it. He never faced reality up to the very last moment. He thought he was going to win. He thought he was going to come back, and he destroyed himself because of it, because he could never look outside and see the world as it really was. So I wanted to sort of get that aspect of that feeling I got from the CIA of like, the world is amazing and the fantasy is amazing, but facing the reality is not that bad.
Is there a character in this that, like, you said to yourself after you were done, I wish I'd been able to, because I don't want to reveal too much about the book, because I think we've done a great tease of it, and I want people to read it, because it's a little different than when we're doing a short story in the comic. You know, there's a lot in this story that I really want people to read. But one of the things that I really like about this book is there's characters that become main characters in the story, and we've already shared them, you know, in the fact that we've got this Soldier and Penn, and they become, you know, main characters that we're really following in the story. But there's so many great characters that you introduce in there that were essential to kind of getting to know the whole situation, everything, both hero and villain. You know, it introduced this concept, or that we got to get to know. Was there anybody in there that you're like, geez, I really wished I could have done a spin-off story with this person, or maybe I would? And I obviously don't know if you have any intention of doing that, but is there anybody that, like, is there any part of you that, like, is looking at any of these characters to say, I would really like to revisit or do more with them and do a side story or something?
Oh, man, yeah, like all of them. My new favorite thing is like I go to conventions and I get sketches of my characters from artists I love. If you go to not to plug myself, but if you want to see the sketches on my Facebook page, Tom King Author is my Facebook page. I post sketches once a week. I post a sketch of the characters, and each I love artist interpretation, because I look at what the artist say and I'm like, oh man, I want to tell the story of that character with that artist. There's a character, Jules, who's an old Holocaust survivor who gave up his powers to open a diner. I don't know why, but I'd love to tell his story. I love writing. You'll see this in the future, but I love writing old men who used to be something and now they're having to sort of live the end of their life. I love that. There's a character called Mashallah, who's a Pashtun, or like a deeply religious Muslim who becomes a superhero and has to live the dual life, not only being a superhero, but the dual life of having been raised in an incredibly not repressive, but an incredibly different society in terms of their treatment of women and their expectations of women, and she has to live as a superhero, having grown up with that. I would have loved to explore that some more. I could go off on tangents on all these characters. They're like my children. I
wanted to see, you know, it was funny how one of the great parts of this book is there's like rich backstories of the characters you know are there, especially when you hear Mashallah talking about Soldier and her whole life there. And I was like, literally, I'm like, that's a character I would like to know more about, just for that reason, because I was really digging, because you could tell that, like, she wants to say that, like, I don't want to be back in this life, and you get it through her tone. And I don't remember her exactly saying that. What I remembered is just you totally got this kind of I don't know if reluctance is the right word, a longing for the superhero side of her, because it opened her up to an avenue that I know you said you went to restricted before, kind of pulled back, but it's kind of like a restriction in the sense that her life without those powers does not let her be a part of that type of thing, or even to consider that type of thing. And I really loved that, because I think that is the real world. There's a lot of things we all would like to do that we see on television and film, read about in books, or even read about people doing that maybe have means or something like that. And you're like, I would love to do that. You just can't. and there was something about seeing these heroes brought back to the real world, you know, where we all live, and seeing them longing for these things because they had been there. They did all those things that we said, wow, I'd love to do that, but we just can't. That was something that I really enjoyed. There's so many of them that I would love to see, like, what was their life like? Like, how majestic was that? What, you know, how cool was their world that they were in when they were doing all that? And that's kind of the neat part of a story, when it makes you think outside of it. It makes you, and I liked that this one was making me think before the story, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, like I did with the time warp story, I put little riddles in my books that you're not supposed to notice. You're supposed to read over them, and you should read the story for the story. That's my number one concern for everything, is you want to read a story not for how it's told, but for what it's told. But one of my favorite, for the first Mashallah, if you read it closely, every single sentence she says is a contradiction. She contradicts herself. Even just in her observations about, like, just in how the prose is written, every single prose sentence in there, it immediately contradicts itself. And it was supposed to represent sort of her in turn. It was supposed to subtly, turn your mind to the fact that this character is constantly conflicted. Like, she believes her religion dictates that she should be home with her family, and she also believes at the exact same time, with the exact same passion, that she has the privilege and the right to go out and fight superheroes and to go out and fight with the superheroes, and that she's an empowered woman. She believes both things at the same time, and both equally powerful.
I got a question about the unique characters in this story. When you're writing as a writer, and you're writing dialogue coming from the character, whether it's internal or external, that they're shouting out, do you ever find yourself where you're writing a line and you're like, she wouldn't say that. Or that's not the way she would say that, or that's the way Soldier would have said that. I need to zip back into Mashallah mode. Does that happen? Or do you just, like, I'm assuming it's probably different from every writer, how the experience is. Do you ever run to the point where you're like, I'm writing for the wrong character right now? I need to catch myself and pull back? Because one of the things I appreciated was the unique voice of each character, and they felt very rich and unique to me. Is that hard to pull off for you?
Dude, I constantly, it's like that is my number one worry, is that the character is going to say something that they wouldn't say, especially something to advance the plot. Basically, my philosophy in writing is every single sentence, every single line of dialogue has to serve the plot. It needs to be there for a purpose. It's there to tell the story. But you can't have that. But it's a contradiction, because you can't have a character talk to advance the plot. So you have to have both of those things in your book. You have to have characters say something that naturally comes to them, and that naturalness has to advance the plot. So it's kind of a weird balance. And I write in it's close third person, but the way I this is getting into the technical writing stuff if your audience is interested in that.
Oh yeah.
But third person, obviously, if you've taken a writing class, it means he, she instead of I or you. And the way I write it is I don't just write in close third person where someone, you think of the narrator sort of sitting on the person's shoulder and telling the story. I put the narrator inside the person's head so that the actual prose is affected by the narrator. It's almost as if the narrator were telling the story in first person, but it's done in third person. So the prose changes as the narrator changes, or the voice of the prose changes as the narrator. So yeah, whenever I read a chapter, I look like an insane man when I'm doing it. I was one of my other lives, I did like intense acting. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was really into theater and all that crap when I was younger. So I just go in there and I'm doing accents and I'm throwing my hands around, and I read them as the characters as if I was reading a radio play. And hopefully if I hear a line of dialogue that just rings totally false, I can cut that out. But yeah, it happens all the time. It's the great. I'm writing something now where I read something. I'm like, you're just putting in there that just as an excuse to move along the plot. And no human being would ever say that. Nobody says, "Hey, thank you for joining me here. I'm glad you joined me here because of this, and I'm glad I'm here because of this. Now let us go on to our next page." People would say, "What? Oh, you have to make that work for you."
Now, I was actually wondering about, like, with creative process. As you're going along, do you have like other people read this as it's going, or is this one of those where you keep it until it's done?
It works differently for different things. So for this, my wife read it it's written in vignettes. So I call them vignettes, but they're issues. I have, like you said, I sort of like 2 or 3 pages of it from the point of view of one of the characters. And the character, the point of view, it's the issue of them. So if it's about the Soldier of Freedom, the Soldier of Freedom number 573. And that tells you what character you're from the point of view, and also it tells you sort of something about the character. I mean, if you're a comic fan, you know that someone who has a 573 number is an established character, and someone who has a volume 3, issue number 12, is a side character they keep trying to restart. So, each vignette I sent to my wife, and she reads it first, and she tells me if I'm totally off my rocker. And she's the nicest reader. She compliments me while she's killing me. I can. My wife is just a lovely, wonderful person, and because we've been together for so many years, I can see when she's bullshitting me, so she can bullshit me and tell me I'm good while I know she's telling me I'm bad, and it's the best way to receive bad news because she'll be like, "Oh, yeah, it was really good," and I'll be like, "Oh crap, it sucked." But when she likes it, she'll be like, "Yeah, it was great. I was really into it. I have no comments." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I got it right that time." Yeah. So she's my first reader. For this novel, I went out to my mother was my second reader. Who knows? My wife doesn't follow comics, but she's young enough to have seen the movies and knows sort of the tropes. My mother, of course, doesn't care about any of that shit. And so she was my second reader to sort of tell me if it worked on a level of someone who knows nothing about comics. And then after that, there was some friends, and then my agent, and my editor.
It's funny, as you're talking about with your wife just being the nice way of telling you bad news, etc. I remember back in college, I had this vision in my head that, hey, I could do stand-up comedy. And we had this open mic night, and I went, up in Toledo, and a couple buddies of mine, and went up to there, and they each were like, it took a lot of courage just to get up there. Like, that bad, huh? They're like, oh, no, just, dude, man, that was gutsy what you did. I wouldn't have the guts to do that. I'm like, oh, that bad. Oh.
Yeah, that hurts.
I would pay big money.
Yeah, how much? I'm willing to contribute to the kitty here. How much would it take to get you back on stage? Come on.
Either that or how much would it take to get the original tape? Is there one?
There is no original. That was a
missed opportunity.
That doesn't exist. But no. I learned that I'm not. That's not a life for me.
Tom, how do you decide on what story idea to green light for yourself to say this is the one I want to work on? How does that work? How did this book come from being an idea in your head to saying this is the one I want to push to get published, or how does that process go about for you?
So it's a 3-step process to come up with a novel idea. This is for me, and the third step is really the stumbling block. So the first step is the idea, is the world. You have basically a what if situation. What if all the superheroes lost their powers? That's an easy concept to come up with, right? And then the second step, also easy, is the characters. And you say, okay, what if all the superheroes lost their powers? All right, okay, well, we'll have a guy who is happy about losing his powers and just wants to rest. And we'll have a guy who is the one guy who didn't lose his powers. Look at that; those are 2 good characters. We'll start with those. And then the third step is the plot. And you're like, okay, I have these characters. I have this idea. What the hell do I do with them? And usually, if you're a stupid writer, like I think the majority of us stupid writers are, you start writing with just the characters and the world because you have these characters in your head. And you have an idea probably for the first 10 pages or so, and then you hit sort of that 10-page mark, and you're like, or even. I think it's even harder. You sort of get the first act out of the way, and then you hit that second act, and you have no idea where to go with it because you run into that plot problem. And ideas that work, or novels that work for me, are ideas where I can figure out that third thing, figure out what I want these characters to do. Because you have a million ideas and you have a million characters, but you don't have a million plots. And of course, the easiest thing to do in all of these things, and you see this constantly, is this is the plot of Watchmen. Is you have a world, you have characters, and then you have no idea what to do with them. So you have a murder, and you have people solve the murder, right? That's like the typical thing you do. And so that first instinct to have a murder and have people solve the murder, you try to throw that away. But when you're desperate, you can use that too.
Tom, is there anything you can announce, what's coming up? I don't want to put you on the spot as far as announcing something you're not ready to announce yet, but is there anything book-wise, comic-wise, or anything that you can announce that you're able to announce if you follow me?
I have upcoming projects I can announce. This is already out there. So I'm in a Dark Horse. I'm doing another anthology with Dark Horse, a prose anthology for the Athena Voltaire story. Steve Bryan's character.
Yes, huge fan.
Yeah, we're next to each other in C2E2 next week. I can't wait to bullshit with that guy. He's awesome. And so I did a prose story for his anthology that I'm insanely proud of. To me, it's probably the best short story I've ever written in my life. And it's about an Athena Voltaire story and she's the hero of the story, obviously, but it's from sort of the villain's point of view, a villain who's trying to kill and rape her, or trying to do horrible things to her and her friends. And I tried to make it a sort of sympathetic villain. I really like the story, so I'm super proud of that. I have upcoming work from a bunch of comic companies, but I don't think I'm allowed to say anything yet. This is very CIA-ish, but I don't think I'm allowed to talk about it. And my next novel is done. My agent loves it. He says it's the best thing I've ever written. It's not about comics. It's about terrorism. It's about westerns, and I love it. I think it might be the best thing I'll probably ever write. It's my sort of my favorite novel, I think. So hopefully that'll be coming out next year.
Where can people find information about, following your work, what's coming up next? Because that's one of the great things I'm enjoying about social media nowadays is, when you get a chance to connect with a favorite creator or a favorite writer, to follow their work because, a lot of times if you get attached on a comic, you don't always realize that, hey, this person does novels as well. Or if you catch on to a novel, you don't realize, oh, they've done a comic work. I want to read that. And I think nowadays we are in such a better place where when you become a fan of somebody, it's very easy to latch onto places where they post, hey, this is out now or it's coming soon and all that. Where do we go for you?
Dude, I totally agree. And I'm just going to go off for a second. Comics are so awesome. I think it's a totally new medium, and someone's going to write something much smarter about this in 20 years, but we are so close to our fans in terms of creators, and as a fan, I'm so close to the other creators. It's insane. I don't think there's ever been a medium or an art form where the fan and the creator have been so easy to reach out and touch each other, not always in sexual ways. Where you can go to a convention and just talk, and everyone is so down to earth, and you can go out and people will respond to you. And it's sort of, this is a new way of creating something where fans are, you can't just call up J.J. Abrams and be like, dude, what were you thinking? But you can write to Bendis on Twitter and he'll write back the next day. It's fantastic. So, if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter. Obviously, but my Twitter handle is Tom King, just my name, and then my initials TK. So Tom King TK, and I'm also on the Facebook. Probably the easiest way is to Google that, but Tom King Author is me on Facebook. That's my fan page. You can go there and like it. And please, please, please reach out to me and tell me anything. Tell me, and we can start a conversation because I want to talk to people. I used to live a life that was very interesting, and I can't draw on it forever, so I have to steal your lives. And now I just sit in the basement. I don't want my next 3 novels to be about my children's poop habits.
You touched on something that I agree with is so much. I think growing up, because we grew up, kind of in the same time as far as what our perception of what comics were like and creators were like. We grew up in an era where you believed there was a bullpen at Marvel. Well, there was, but then when we were kids, it was a page in a book, and you had this perception of it. And I think we're so lucky nowadays that with conventions and social, not just conventions, where you get to meet people like you and have great opportunities with that. By the way, your banner is incredible. I love the book. The book cover blown up is killer. The ability through social media and conventions and every little aspect of it to be able to connect with creators, I think, is what we all imagined we could do as kids. That you would be able to write a letter into a comic and you're talking directly to that person, which happened sometimes, but not on the level that you have it today. And I really appreciate the fact that creators are doing that they're connecting with their audience and building kind of this, because to me, it increases my loyalty. Their work already does that. I'm going to read the work regardless. But to feel like, wow, I matter as a part of this person's community, that's something that you hold on to. And I think nowadays especially, it's essential. Because what ends up happening is then that fan also is so loyal that they're talking, hey, you got to read this, pick this up, grab that, pointing people in the direction of things. And I think that kind of networking is really terrific. And I think that's a great use of the positive side of the internet. We don't always see that, but the positive side of the internet and social media is those connections, those relationships that we build where we can do that. And I think it's great. I think I appreciate you coming on. I mean, God, you give us an insane amount of time, but it's really great to have an opportunity to talk to you about your work, especially the fact that we get to talk to you about not just comics, but your novel as well. It's such a diverse background, and really appreciate your time.
Well, I mean, I grew up. I mean, this seems almost unthinkable to it, but maybe it doesn't. But I grew up as a closet comic book fan. Like, I didn't tell my friends I was a comic book fan. I hid my comics. Like, comics to me were something geeky and weird. And if I told people, I wouldn't have friends. And not that I was making a ton, anyways. But like, I had to hide that. And when I go to conventions, I still see that, like, embracing comics and embracing that geek and embracing that fantasy. It's brave and it's a little painful, and the fact that we can have a community and you can reach out to your creators and understand that's sort of, I mean, I'm just like preaching goo goo goo. Everyone knows it, but it really is meaningful to me to meet so many people that sort of love the same things I love. But everybody gets that from the internet, but it is cool.
And I do think, the fact that more and more, you touch on this before, because I even thinking in my head when my own perception of how sci-fi is perceived by the general public. I think you're right. I think it is a lot more acceptable now. And I think because of that, it's becoming a lot more acceptable to geek out about things and to admit that you do geek out about those things. Because you're right, when we were kids, it was not cool. And, usually people that I knew that I was a fan of that stuff, and you would so quickly try to deflect that as much as possible, because otherwise you're going to be ridiculed a lot of times, even by people who you knew also liked the same stuff you do. Just because it was a popular thing to do. I had friends of mine who I knew, like, dude, what are you talking about? You have a stack at home. What do you mean? But they would throw you under the bus so that way the image was on you. And you don't get that nowadays on that level. I don't think as much. And I think it's a cool time, especially I think in our age group, it's nice to be able to say, all right, I'm finally validated. How many years later?
So I have 3 comics by my bed that I keep in case there's a fire. I'll run out with those and I'll come back and get my family. And one of them is Flash 54, which was the first DC comic, or not first DC, but up there. And it's my favorite comic of all time. It's a simple story about a guy. Flash is on a plane. A stewardess falls out and he has to save her. He just has to jump, and Flash doesn't fly, so he has to go through. It's just like 2 people falling in space for 22 pages and trying to solve sort of this puzzle. And I love it. I've read it a million times. And yesterday, and it's written by William Mester Loebs and drawn by Greg LaRocque. And 2 days ago, I was at DC Awesome Con, which is my local con, and I sat next to Greg LaRocque for a whole day. He had the table next to me.
Nice.
And I was like trying not to fanboy out on him, but that idea that the creators are right there and that we're all sort of part of this, we're all in this together. I mean, it's just too awesome. It's awesome. What do you say?
How has your experience been as a newer creator when you encounter like more established creators? I mean, is that usually? I don't want to put you in a position where you're putting anybody, but do you usually find there's a camaraderie there the way we do as fans when we get to interact with you guys?
Yeah, I've been blown away by how accepting comic book creators are. I mean, I'm not I mean, I don't walk up to anybody and they know who I am. But people are insanely nice and very, come into our club. This is open to all. Just come in. Let's talk stories. Let's talk how this is done. Let's complain about the food at the Baltimore Comic Con, or whatever it is. They've been. I will let me complain just so I don't talk all goodness. I have had a real problem going up to establish. This is my problem, not their problem. Going up to people I worship, and I went up to Len Wein at WonderCon. I was exhibiting at WonderCon, and he was there, and I went up to him and I said, "You're Len Wein." He's like, "Yeah," and I was like, "You invented Wolverine. You wrote some of the best DC comics of all time. You were the editor on Watchmen." And he's like, yeah, that was me. I was like, "You're awesome." He's like, "Yeah." I have no idea what next sentence to say.
Yeah.
Once I say you're awesome, I don't know what to do. And
you think especially with like how much we've recorded this kind of stuff that like It's different if I was having a conversation like we're having right now in this environment. I would be able to do that. But when we're at a convention, it's all of a sudden like I'm back in idiot comic fan mode. I can't tell you how many, like, okay, we've done 350 shows now, countless hours of this, where we've talked to death about comics, come up with like way too long discussions about one panel. And so I can do that for countless hours, but I'm at their table. I really enjoy your work.
Yeah, that's right.
There's nowhere for them to go with that. That's not a conversation. That's a thank you,
We're all Chris Farley, We're like,
yeah,
remember that time?
I mean, and we do that a lot on the show too, but it's not. It's when you're in person, it's like there's just no. Every question I ever ask invariably is one where I'm like, I asked him nothing that he can go with. You know what I'm terrible with when I'm getting a convention sketch from somebody and I'm sitting there, and these are even people that maybe I know, where I've known them, or maybe they've been on the. I've had this happen with people that have been on the show. So these are friends, like they've talked with us for enough times on the show, and I'm sitting there with them and they're doing a sketch for me, and I don't know what to say. We've talked for like enough time, and I'm like, okay, I'm being an idiot right now. I don't know what to say. I think I'm that way in general, though. It's funny how like this environment's very safe to kind of just open up and express yourself, but when like you're actually sitting there and like in being in real person. It just falls apart. But I think that's the great part of this, too. I don't know that I ever want to hit a point as a comic fan where I don't feel that sense of wonder. I think that's something that should be... And I mean this way, and actually as a fan of novels, I grew up as a kid being a reader. It's always about the story and being captivated and pulled into the story. I loved the library as a kid and being a part of that whole experience. So I don't know that I ever want to feel like I don't appreciate the work enough that it gives me that, because I love that, like, I'm 42 and I'm still getting that sense of wonder from all of this. And that's to me like it's an escape from everything else. And that's what this all should be. So when I'm there and I am a mushmouth, I guess I'd rather be the mushmouth because I'm still in awe of these people. And, in awe of every creator, because what you guys do, being able to sit down and develop this stuff and take us to places that we don't imagine is really a gift. And that's something that I think it's something good to know that, like, we still have that, we have that effect on people. We can do that. I don't think we ever want to get desensitized to that, because that's the cool part of this.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, you it is tough. You meet your heroes, and you hope they stay your heroes, kind of. Yeah. But wow, I remember walking up to my first con, because I didn't go when I was in CII. I didn't go do anything public, so I was like trying to be anonymous. So I left when it was Baltimore, and I walked up to Walt Simonson. And I consider myself to be fairly knowledgeable in comics and to be an intelligent person or whatever. And I was like, "Oh, you're awesome!" We had that conversation. I was like, "Okay, this is the moment. Ask him a penetrating question, which will inspire him to say, 'Hey, do you want me to draw your book?'" I was like, "Do you like writing or drawing better?" That's what came out of my mouth. That was the question that 32 years of comic book experience put on the table, and he just looked at me like, "Well, it depends." Next, So yeah, I'm there with you, man.
I love when I'm at a panel at a convention, and I'll raise my hand, because I want to ask a question, because I'm like, I just want that interaction. I want them to be part of that experience. Very rarely do I ever have that thought-provoking question where they're like, "Oh, that's really a good question, and here's what I was thinking about in that moment." It very rarely happens. It happened with Dean Cain, and I asked something about the nature of, like Superman being Clark Kent, where that's kind of a role. And Superman being Superman, that's kind of a role, because he can't ever reveal that he's Clark Kent. But in the Lois and Clark show, when we saw him with Ma and Pa Kent, that was the time where his character got a chance to be real. It was that we got to see who his Clark Kent really was, because he really had like a 3-stage role there.
Yeah.
And I asked him if that was something that was consciously developed. So he went off on this great tangent about it, saying, yeah, no, that was, he said, I'm so glad you caught that because people don't pull it up. I'm like, out of like 700 convention questions I've asked, finally I've got one where a guy can go off on a tangent about it. I'm like, yes, score. Now it won't happen again for another like 8 or 9 years, but at least I got one. So that was my victory. That was, I'll be 84 the next time it happens, but
yeah, I still have my Chris Farley moments.
It's hard not to, right?
Yeah.
Remember that? Remember that time with the Beatles?
That was awesome, man. Well, the first time when I was at Wizard World Chicago, and the show was not even, it was a couple months old, if that much, and we had a chance to, Jeff Johns was doing a signing, and I was just a stumbling, bumbling idiot. And we walked away from the booth after he signed it, and he was very nice. And I turned to Sean and said, "That's why we can never do an interview podcast, because that's all you'll get from me."
Yeah, I mean, you guys have to be broadcasters. I mean, what you do is a talent. I mean, you can't just go on the air and do this. It's hard. I appreciate what you all do.
Well, the funny part is, it's when we first started, because we were positive, we denied interviews, in the sense that we didn't want to do that because we didn't want people to think we were saying nice things. Because we've been lucky enough that when we've had people on, we do it rarely. And it's situations where writers such as we like your work, and we're having you on, and what we're saying is like genuine. Like, it's cool to have you on because I loved your story in Time Warp. I'm genuinely digging your book. So, it's coming from that standpoint. Otherwise, I would just say nothing, because just because in the sense that I'm not going to call somebody on, obviously trash their work. But, we're in a nice position where we've been lucky enough to build relationships along the way with people who we genuinely like their work. And because of the nature of our show not being an interview show, we don't have to say, okay, we got to do this forced interview with somebody. We just, it's happened kind of organically. But for the longest time, we did not do interviews because we didn't want anyone to think, oh, those guys are just saying nice things because they're going to try to get this person on or that person on. And I think there's a lot more purpose nowadays. Because I think one of my frustrations with the internet, when you go on the flip side of it, is it's so easy for people to do hit-and-run negative comments on something that they've never read or just read a blurb of or read a page of and haven't exposed it with any depth and haven't gone... And it's hurt. I think it's hurtful to the creative process and also to a potential fan of that material reading it. So I think there's a purpose served by fans getting together and just being happy to be fanboys. Because that's my experience, because I am still the guy that puts my foot in my mouth at a con, and I always want to be the guy that does that because of this. Because I still geek out at my pull stack and books and stuff like this, and it's kind of fun. And it's fun to hear a creator say, like yourself, say, no, I'm in that place too. It's like, yeah, I've got a book published. I've been, got comic work, and I've got new things coming out. I got another book on the slate. I've got, more comic work on the slate. But it's still, when I'm sitting there, even though I'm one of the boys, I'm in that group, I still have that moment. I think that's cool. That sense of wonder's still there, and that's neat that we had an opportunity to go on that because we're all in that same place.
It's fun. I was on a panel with the brilliant Justin Jordan, from Luther Strode, which everyone should read. And he was talking about how negative reviews don't bother him, and positive reviews bother him more. And I was thinking, man, what a blessed man he is. Because I remember before I got into anything creative, I would think, like, why do people complain about their reviews? I mean, who knows who's writing this? This could be a 9-year-old in Bratislava who's never read anything and just going on the internet. And I'm stupid enough to read the 9-year-old and be like, oh man, I wanted every 9-year-old in Bratislava to think that I was lovely. So people do read those, but I mean, what are you going to do? It's a free world.
We have a huge 9-year-old Bratislavian audience, and
hell yeah!
So this is your chance.
Advertisers dig them. You guys are lucky. You're going to get big bucks. This is Mad Men stuff here.
Tom, is there anything else about your work that you want to shout out that we haven't had a chance to get to? I want to definitely make sure that we get to anything if we haven't covered something.
I think you've covered it all. I think that's it.
Well, Tom, we'd definitely love to follow up with you in the future about future novels and future comic work, just to catch up on your career and what's going on, because I've become, in a very quick amount of time, a fan of your work, but then having had the opportunity to meet you, I've become a fan of the person as well. So I really appreciate you've given us like a couple hours of your time here, which, is normal for our show.
I know, I have to write a short story tonight. Oh, I'm under this crazy deadline. So I'll be up all night, so feel free to call me if it's 3 in the morning. I'll be reading my computer out loud.
We really appreciate it. And for anybody listening to this that has not checked out either Time Warp or A Once Crowded Sky, I cannot recommend them enough. Obviously, from this discussion, you can get that. So please consider picking them up, supporting Tom King's work, and make sure to follow Tom and check out what's coming up next. And Tom, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Dude, thank you guys. It's been a pleasure.
Like a human helicopter, the Flash rotates his body, rising faster, faster!
Once again, sponsoring us this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Remember to be checking out this week, DCBService.com, for all of the amazing deals for May orders. So make sure to go over to their website and check them out. We want to thank them for once again sponsoring our show. Over at InStockTrades.com, they have a plethora of Batman material over there, and various versions of it. It's cool because if you're a hardcover collector, you can pick up the hardcovers you've been looking for. If you like absolutes, you can grab those over there. If you like trades, you can go ahead and go that route. It all depends on, and mix and match and all of that. Remember, orders of $50 or more will give you free shipping, and I urge you to go over and check their site because they are constantly running specials. Amazing deals that happen every month. So check out both of our sponsors, DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com, and we want to thank them for continuing to support our show. Want to remind everyone about our show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388-4434 or drnorge on Skype. We've gotten a number of voicemails, and also we got a couple audio comments that have been sent to us that have to do with our 350th anniversary show that will be on part 2 along with the remainder of Batman Year 1. So we will be airing that on that episode, which will be coming out towards the end of the week. So we want to thank you for that. I also want to shout out our Facebook group. We have a Raging Bullets Facebook group, which I urge you to join. We're actually getting close to 300 members over there, which it's really impressive, the amount of people that participate and post there regularly about things both inside DC Comics but outside of it and all of geek culture. And I think it's great. We have friends who post about their blogs and all the cool articles that they're doing over there, things that they've seen in the news, in and around the internet and from conventions. People will post different funny pictures, and they'll shout out their podcasts and things. It's a great community. Talk about gaming and everything. I urge you guys to go over there, pop in, join the great discussions over there. I learn a lot from the group there, and I just want to shout out the amazing people who participate in our Facebook group. We're also available on Twitter. We have our show website, RagingBullets.com, that I update every week. And there's just a lot of options to find us on Google Plus and places like that. So I just want to thank everyone for everything they do in social media to let things know, all the retweets that go out there and stuff that just people do to let people know about what we're doing and try to let people, on the social end, that networking. We rely so much on our listeners for that, and we greatly appreciate it. So we will see everyone next week with part 2.
Bye.
Flying through space and time, 1,000 different lifetimes. Faded for love and loss and incredibly clear sightlines. Swinging your mace around, such a practical outlook. Helping the JSA and occasionally supporting your own book. Hawkman, Hawkman. Eagle eyes can't see, Hawkman, your plan. And what you do to me, Hawkman. Scythian guard or Egyptian, working so hard to thwart you and Hawkgirl's mission. The odds are not on your side, and danger seems to stack up. Things would be so much easier if you would just call for backup. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see your plan and what you do to me. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see. Hawkman.